Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. Thanks for joining us today on Wednesday, May 20th. This is episode 38 of TechStrong TV, and I know where many of you are working right now, probably from home, but at least in the areas you're working on, things are maybe opening up a little bit, phase one kind of stuff. And that's great, right? It's good to be able to get out, see people, get some fresh air. But I'm also reading a lot of articles and seeing a lot of news, and whether it's fake or not, I'm not going to get into. But we're seeing a lot that different authorities, whether they be at the state or federal level here in the U.S. or around the world, are not being totally transparent in some cases with the continuing numbers, continuing infection rates, deaths, hospitalizations of folks with COVID. And you may be one of those people who think the whole thing is a hoax, and if you are, God bless you. But something has to explain all the deaths, and in absence of anything else you've got, you're kind of left to pointing it at COVID. So anyway, I'm not saying don't go out. I'm not saying don't get your hair cut. I'm not saying don't do anything. All I'm saying is, hey, our wish for you is to be safe and well and strong. That's what the whole thing of TechStrong is about. So, we have a big, in the U.S. here, we have a big Memorial Day weekend coming up. Enjoy it, but don't rush in where fools dare to tread, so to speak, and become part of what could be a second wave. That being said, I wanted to also mention that we're getting ever closer to June 4th, which is our date for TechStrong Con, which will probably be like the biggest virtual event we've ever done. And I'm really John Willis picked the speaker, handpicked most of these speakers for the main stage, and we just have an amazing lineup of speakers. So I'm going to ask you to go over to TechStrongCon.com. Check out the speakers, register, it's free. We also have full pavilions. We have a sponsor stage as well. We have some great speakers there. And the other thing we're going to be announcing is that we're going to be giving away a whole bunch of different kinds of prizes and gifts to people who attend live. Though TechStrong Con, it's 12 hours strong, and it will be available on demand as well. But if you're attending live, there's all kinds of techie kind of gadgets you might want to win, like game consoles and wireless headphones and all kinds of great stuff like that. So do check out techstrong.com. While I'm reminding you also, if you want to follow along on the Slack channel for our TechStrong TV show, it's techstrongtv.slack.com, and you can join that by getting an invite over at techstrong.tv, which is also a great place to watch the show, see past episodes, working from home, workout from home with Jeremy Jones. Episodes of that on there as well. A lot of people have asked, though, what about the individual interviews? If I don't want to sift through the whole show, can I just get the interviews? A lot of these interviews are available in what we call our TechStrong TV Spotlight, and that's up on digitalanarchist.com. So if you go over there, you'll be able to check that out. Just, there's so much information and content that we are spinning up here at Media Ops over the last month and a half. Besides TechStrong TV and the TechStrong.com virtual event, we're also happy to do a bunch of other virtual events that we've partnered with some of our sponsors with. There's a ton of good stuff out there. But let me tell you what we've got today. Number one, we have our usual list of great interviews that I'm going to tell you about in a second. But I want to lead off with this. Usually Tuesday is John Willis Day here on TechStrong TV. And we had a great interview queued up with John yesterday with Paula Thrasher, another friend of ours. And Paula is just, for large organizations, aerospace, government. She's a tremendous DevOps leader with a ton of experience. Somehow or another, through the magic of TV and video, that interview got cut off after just like about 10 seconds or 20 seconds. It's a 40-minute interview. I was horrified when I watched it yesterday myself, because it was a good interview. I was looking forward to it. And I know many of you tune in on Tuesdays to watch John. So we're going to take another shot at it today. We've got John Willis on with Paula Thrasher. We're replaying that video in its entirety, so you'll be able to see it. And I apologize if you were disappointed on that yesterday. I was, and I'm sure many of you were as well. In addition to John Willis with Paula Thrasher, though, we also have Matt DeBergalis, who's the founder and CTO of Apollo GraphQL. And many of you in the development world out there are probably familiar with GraphQL. It's one of the most popular open source projects since being spawned out of Facebook years ago. And Apollo, of course, probably represents 95% of the GraphQL downloads and so forth. And Matt's a founder there. He's going to give us the scoop on it. Then I'm happy to be joined by actually an old friend of mine, Tim Erlin, VP Product and Strategy at Tripwire. Tim and I go back in the security space probably 15 years. Before Tim was at Tripwire, and obviously before I was here. But Tim's going to tell us about a new survey that the folks at Tripwire recently did and what some of the findings were there. I thought it was pretty interesting. So stay tuned for that. And then in the something old, something blue category, I went back to our Next Gen CD virtual event that we did last year. And I pulled out a session from James Strachan, who James is an author, Jenkins X person with CloudBees. And this is a really good session he did on serverless Jenkins with Tekton. So if you're into the whole software development, Kubernetes, Jenkins X world, CI/CD, check out James' presentation here. I think it's a really great one. After James, I'll come back with the news. And then, just giving you the usual rundown of what's hot on Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and DevOps.com. And then I think we're going to hand things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. And Charlene has Greg Jensen of Oracle and Joshua McKibben of KPMG. And they're going to discuss the highlights of the recent Oracle KPMG Cloud Threat Report, which was just released, I think it was last Thursday or Friday. And that should be a good one with some good insights, especially for the enterprise. After that, as I mentioned, we are replaying the John Willis, Paula Thrasher interview, and I again apologize for yesterday. After John and Paula, we'll be happy to jump into our analyst corner with Mitch. Mitchell Ashley has some great interviews and commentary for us today. And then rounding things up for this Wednesday, May 20th, we have my partner, Jane Grohl, CEO of DevOps Institute, talking about the humans of DevOps, and Jane will also be discussing a Skill Up event that the DevOps Institute is putting on Thursday, and it's around Kubernetes. So a little bit of Kubernetes information for us all today, and then I'll be back for some closing remarks. So it sounds like it's going to be a great day, a great show. Wednesday, hump day, on a week heading into a long weekend. I hope you're going to enjoy it. I'm glad we're able to replay this John Paula interview. And just a heads up, I will tell you that tomorrow, Thursday, the 21st, we are going to have a John Willis and Damon Edwards DevOps Cafe video broadcast, the second one that they've done. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. But for now, I think we're going to take a commercial break, and then we'll be right back with the rest of our show. Stay tuned.
Tech is strong. We may be working from home, but tech goes on. Tech will continue to collaborate. Tech will continue to communicate. Tech is strong. Join us for TechStrong Con, June 4th, 12 hours strong, TechStrong. Featuring John Bachagalupe Willis, Shannon Leitz, William Hurley, Jasmine James, Kat Swatell, Cornelia Davis, James Wickett, Courtney Kistler, Damon Edwards. Live Q&A with speakers, exhibit halls, and more. Free, but register before spots fill at techstrongcon.com.
Hey everyone. All right, back here in the studio. We're about to go to our first guest, which is Matt DeBergalis, who's the founder CTO at Apollo GraphQL. Before we run Matt's interview, I want to apologize. When I first introduced Matt during the interview, I guess I was thinking of my clothes size, and I said Apollo GraphQL XL, but it's not XL, it's QL. And for those who are familiar already with GraphQL, you would know that. But had a senior moment there, so I wanted to apologize in advance on that and make sure you all realize it. As I said in the top of the show, GraphQL is a very, very popular open source project, and the folks at Apollo GraphQL really are just leading the project, I think with 90 or 95% of the code coming from there. Of course, GraphQL is under the auspices of the Linux Foundation, which isn't a bad place to be if you're an open source project these days. So let's go to our interview now with Matt DeBergalis, founder, CTO of Apollo GraphQL.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this segment. Our guest right now is Matt DeBergalis. He's the co-founder, CTO of Apollo GraphXL. Hey Matt, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Hey, looks like you're outside there enjoying the weather.
It's a beautiful day in San Francisco.
Yeah. One of the things, Matt, we were talking off camera, is with everyone working from home, people do have a chance at least to enjoy the outside a little bit more than you would if you were in the office all day. And that's not terrible, right? But it is what it is. Anyway, Matt, let's start real basic. We're going to kind of use the Socratic method here. Start real broad and get narrow. I think, a lot of our audience is somewhat familiar with GraphXL, but maybe not. And even if they think they're familiar, they may not be as familiar as they really think they are. So why don't we start off with what's GraphXL? Where did it come from? How did it get out into the market as an open source project, etc.?
Yeah, GraphQL started in maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, originally at Facebook. And it was a new kind of API that was designed to help large teams collaborate on great user experiences. And What it does, different from other API technologies, is GraphQL allows the application developer, the team that's actually building the user interface, that's making a user experience, describe, almost like a database query, what data they need for their screen. Traditional APIs work the other way around. The server tells you what you're going to get, and then it's on the application team to figure out how to use that in that form and glue it together with other parts of data. But with GraphQL, you can describe in a really natural way exactly what you need from a menu of all the data that's available to you in an organization. And it means it's possible to build rich experiences. If you think about an e-commerce application today, table stakes isn't just products on your screen, but you have to have user recommendations and real-time pricing and personalization. And it's building apps like that gets really complicated because each of those pieces of data is coming from a different team, a different part of the organization. It's a different API. And you end up having to write a lot of code to bring all that together. And that's what makes app dev so slow and challenging. With GraphQL, you just type what you expect as a query. It's a little bit like ordering off of Amazon. Everything's on the screen. You don't have to worry about what warehouse it came from or how it's going to get to your door. You just pick what you want from the catalog.
It's funny, when you were talking about it, they used to describe that as an Amazon-like experience, right? And you used the word yourself there. But this, to be clear, this came out of Facebook, right? And it has implications, GraphQL, beyond e-commerce, right? And doing that, there's it's all about building that kind of app experience to what the end user sees.
Yeah, our view is every company is a digital company now, especially in 2020 with COVID. That transformation has accelerated dramatically. And it's the companies that can build great software, that can take their data that's so valuable and create a user experience that's so delightful. Those are the companies that are going to succeed. And I think what they're all asking is, how do we make the most of our development team? How do we accelerate time to market for the apps we want to build? How do we make those apps world class? And the answer is really about connecting your users and your data. And so we see GraphQL as an important development in API technology and at this point, a developer megatrend, because it answers that question of how you're going to ship great software faster and at lower cost.
Excellent. All right, let's go back to this timeline now. So Facebook, about I think it was 2012, right? So it's 7-8 years ago, maybe more. They kind of pioneered this open API, or they pioneered this API, but then they open it up, right? It's an open source. Is the IP at that point? Does Facebook donate the IP to the community? Is it who actually owned that IP, if you will?
GraphQL is an open standard. It's been an open standard since the beginning, and I think that's a big reason for its rapid growth and success. It's so important, especially for an API technology, to have an ecosystem, to have interoperability. If you're going to make an investment as a company, as New York Times and Expedia and Twitter and many others have, to move your entire API strategy to the graph, it has to be on top of not just open source, but an open standard. So that standard is now under the stewardship of the Linux Foundation. And all of the implementation that we build at Apollo, we're the open source company behind most of the GraphQL out there in the world, is all open source MIT software.
Under the MIT license is right. So Matt, let's talk about you personally. You're a co-founder, CTO over at Apollo. When did you get involved here?
The GraphQL story is interesting. Things like GraphQL emerged at a lot of companies right around the same time. Netflix had a technology called Falcor that solved a similar problem. I mentioned Twitter earlier. They had done some early work on this. I had started a company called Meteor that was a JavaScript application framework, and we had a very similar architectural concept. In Meteor, you described what you wanted in the form of a query instead of writing code to bring data onto the screen. And so for us, GraphQL is exciting because it is, as I said, an open standard, and it's an opportunity for us to bring those ideas to, in my view, every application developer in the world. Every company is going to have a data graph. It's a dramatically better development experience, lets you write your software faster. It allows you to have far better tooling. If you ask developers what's so exciting about GraphQL, the first thing they're often going to talk about is the tools are so great. They're so descriptive. I have strong types in my application. I have a embedded story about documentation, so that as I'm describing the data I need, I have a catalog that explains to me what all that data is and what I can do with it. And so we were excited to take advantage of that open source footprint and that open standard to bring these ideas to the full app development community.
So it sounds like there was kind of like parallel evolution and development going on in multiple places, but luckily for the community, rather than having like a balkanization or around this kind of API, around this kind of functionality, everyone kind of and this is before Linux Foundation kind of took over stewardship of it, everyone sort of congealed around one standard, and that probably accelerated adoption and use versus having, everyone's different flavor of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It shows the power of open standards and open source. It speaks to, I think, the elegance of GraphQL. It's easy to learn. It's very approachable. Apollo's strategy, when we built the open source implementations of GraphQL that are now so popular around the ecosystem, our strategy was to make sure that those libraries could be incrementally adopted into any setting. So whether you're a 2-person startup or a 1,000-person enterprise, GraphQL, even though it's a new kind of API, is something that you can adopt piece by piece, application by application, screen by screen, right alongside your legacy REST APIs or whatever else you're using today. And it's technologies like that that spread so quickly. And the other benefit of the data graph is it has a network effect to it. It is literally a network. So when a company starts down this path, what they're doing is they're beginning to describe the kind of data that their applications use. And each step of the way, it unlocks a new set of screens, a new set of applications, a new set of teams that can start to use the graph and expand the graph. It's what we see as this virtuous cycle where you might start with one small piece of your web application, but then your iOS team gets wind of this and they realize they can port their iOS application over to the same data graph and reuse the work you've done and stop having to maintain their own set of custom APIs for their application. And then that brings momentum to other parts of the app or other teams or other products in the organization. And so we see this accelerating effect typically in a company once this starts.
Excellent, excellent. So, Apollo has really kind of, I think I read something like 95% of all usages of GraphQL are on the Apollo system. Sorry about that. And it was like an outrageous number. Was it 1 million downloads a month or?
I think we're well north of that now, but yeah, it's growing very popular. It's a better way to build apps.
Absolutely. Now, putting aside the whole COVID thing if we can, put it aside for a moment. We live in this world of automation, rapid application development, CI/CD pipelines, right? And we call it DevOps, but how is GraphQL an accelerator of that, or is it kind of outside of that? How do you see that fitting into this whole kind of software delivery factory, if you will?
Yeah, I think the interesting trend has been at every layer of the stack, technology that allows teams to collaborate more effectively. The whole story of CI/CD is, in a world where it was one big software team, there's lots of ways to make sure you ship good software. You can have a QA team. They can test the app, then you ship it. But in a world where you want to let multiple teams work side by side, each on their own part of the application, you need infrastructure so that one team doesn't break the other team's efforts. And so we see the rise of continuous integration. Or cloud native technology. It used to be that a company had one big piece of infrastructure, and there were lots of ways you could build that infrastructure, and it always involved a team of people. But with cloud native technology, two teams can write two separate microservices, put them in a Docker container, and they will work very well side by side, even though the two teams wrote them completely separate. They could be built in separate technologies, they could have separate purposes. It doesn't matter, they all fit together. So cloud native lets us collaborate at the infrastructure layer. React for the user interface, same story. In the old days, you had one big user interface. But with React, you can have multiple teams that each build their own piece of the UI. And when you put it all together on the screen, it works well. They don't break each other. And so too for GraphQL. It used to be very difficult for multiple teams to collaborate on one API. You just have no idea what impact your change might have on another use case or another team's effort. But with GraphQL, and with Apollo in particular, it's possible for multiple teams to each define their own piece of the data graph. And then you can compose those together. So if I go to that menu of all the data and I want to write my query to fill in my screen, I may be pulling data from 2 or 3 or 5 different teams, that have each built their piece of the graph in their own technology stack, running in their own environment, and it doesn't matter. I'm isolated, I'm decoupled from that as a developer. And I think it's that collaboration that really drives the excitement in the enterprise, where you're always going to have dozens of teams that are all trying to ship products as quickly as they can, high quality products that draw from multiple data sources and have to be shipped on multiple platforms. And to be able to do that without colliding with each other, without waiting on each other, is really the key to being a digital first company. And that's what's driving a lot of enterprise adoption of the data graph.
Great, man. All right. We can't ignore COVID forever, so we're getting near the end here. But what effect, if any, has you seen on either the downloads or the community or the pace of things as a result of COVID with Apollo GraphQL?
Downloads have gone up since the spring, and I think the story is people still need to write software, and they are still writing software. And I mentioned earlier, I think if we zoom out, the reality is every company needs to accelerate its digital strategy. They thought they had 2 years, they've got 2 months. And
or 2 weeks.
It's life and death for these companies, right? If you are unable to build a high quality digital experience in the first half of 2020, then that's your business, right? That's the ball game. So what we're seeing is companies are hungry to build great digital products and accelerate time to market and save money doing so. And that all points to GraphQL. And the other challenge is they all have to do it with a team now that's distributed. Everybody's working from home. So technologies that let you collaborate effectively are ever more important in a world where these aren't going to be all sitting together, your front-end developer, your back-end developer, your QA engineer all next to each other in a room. You've got to have tooling that allows you to work effectively. You've got to have collaboration systems and so forth. And again, that's exactly what GraphQL is.
We're doing a big event on June 4th called TechStrong Con, and it's around emerging technologies, DevOps, DevSecOps, digital transformation, and cyber. And this is a very common theme we're hearing, that it's these kinds of cloud, let's call it cloud native for now, meaning they're open and all of that, right? These kinds of cloud native technologies are enabling us to exist, right? And to continue moving forward, or at least surviving. Think about where we would be without the cloud, without cloud native software, without the internet and everything right now. It would be a pretty bleak landscape out there, bleaker than it is. And so it's a chicken or the egg, right? I mean, where would we be without it? Thank God we have it. Anyway, hey Matt, we're out of time. Keep up the great work over there at Apollo GraphQL, and you know what? Thank goodness we have projects and software like this that kind of, because it's more than just keeping software developed. At this point in the game, it's almost like keep humanity moving forward, right? Otherwise, you
I could not agree more. That's right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? You read I'm a sci-fi person, right? You read sci-fi things, you get that sort of the apocalyptic Mad Max thing about our society. Something like this could push society over, but when technology keeps going, moving forward, and that's really what TechStrong's all about. So good stuff. Hey man, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks a bunch. Enjoy your weekend.
You too. All righty. You know what, Matt? I'm going to ask you to say your last name because it's too far away on this screen. I can't read it, and I don't want to mess it up. Matt
DeBergalis,
CTO, co-founder, Apollo GraphQL, here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We're going to be right back with our next guest.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
Hey, everyone. All right. Getting ready now for our next interview. You know, one of the nice things about being in the security industry for the last 20 years is I've had a chance to meet so many smart, interesting people who, as you know, I've gone forward in my career doing different things. So have they. Tim Earl, when I first met Tim, I don't even think he was a director yet, but he's been VP now for some time. Really, Tim, one of the nice guys in the industry and bright fellow. He's with Tripwire, and Tim and I have a great conversation right here on some recent announcements from Tripwire. So here's my interview with Tim Erlin from Tripwire.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Oh, our next segment here features someone I've had the pleasure of knowing in the security industry. I'm going to guess 17 maybe years, a long time. Tim Erlin with Tripwire. Tim, welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you. It's got to be about 16, 17 years, no, Tim?
Yeah, it must be something like that. It's been a long time.
Yeah. Well, why don't we start with this, Tim? You're with Tripwire, as I mentioned, but what's your title?
Vice President of Product Management and Strategy.
Absolutely. And Tim, well, you've been a VP of product and strategy kind of stuff for as long as I think I know you. Not all at Tripwire, obviously. And Tim, you know what? I got to assume our audience is familiar with Tripwire, but just in case, for people who may not be familiar.
Sure. Yeah,
give me a little background.
Most people, of course, know Tripwire as the sort of creator, pioneer of file integrity monitoring. We, of course, do much more than that today. We've expanded that into secure configuration management and vulnerability management. And in 2015, we were acquired by Belden, which brought along a really strong industrial networking pedigree. So we have a strong focus on industrial cybersecurity, in addition to the enterprise IT security that we focused on before.
Absolutely. Tim, recently you guys have done a survey on the impact of COVID-19 in cybersecurity, correct?
That's right. Absolutely.
All right. Tell us a little bit. Give us a little background here.
Yeah, it's always, when we have questions about what's happening in the cybersecurity industry around an event or an attack or a new threat or a new technology, we like to put out a survey to gather some data so that we're well informed from practitioners in the space. And this COVID-19 pandemic is obviously a huge event, not just for security, but for the world. So we wanted to understand a little bit about how cybersecurity practitioners and professionals are thinking about and responding to the event. So we completed this survey. There were about 350 respondents, a good distribution across company size and job titles. So I think it's a pretty good representative look at how people are thinking about cybersecurity amidst a pandemic.
I agreed. Well, let's start out with how many people respond. Give us some of the demographics on the survey, Tim.
Yeah, so about 350 people. I think it was 345 exactly. And it was split pretty evenly across organization size. And then around job titles, it was pretty even there between individual contributors, team managers, and executives. There was a little bit of a weight towards the team managers. I think that came in at 47% of the respondents. So
Really?
A nice spread in terms of sample. Sometimes we see these surveys are heavily weighted towards individual contributors or executives, but that split gives us a good perspective, I think.
Absolutely. All right. We've set the stage. Tim, talk to me now. What
Sure.
what's the survey say?
Well, there's lots of interesting data in there, and some of it really isn't that surprising. I think the headline we put on the press release was that 94% of respondents are more concerned about security now than before COVID-19. And that in and of itself, I don't think surprises anybody. I was thinking about that, and I wondered what percentage you would get if you asked people, are you more concerned, cybersecurity people, are you more concerned about cybersecurity now than you were this morning? You'd probably get a majority that would say yes. I mean, part
I'd
of the
say
job
it's probably, yeah, I think it's over 80%, but go ahead.
So, we of course didn't stop with that question. We drilled into, what is it that you're more concerned about? And this is where you start getting some more interesting data. 58% said that they were more concerned about employee home network security. 45% said they were more concerned about increased ransomware, phishing, and social engineering attacks. And then 41% said they were more concerned about keeping remote systems configured securely. So those are just the top three, but that gives you sort of a flavor for what people are worrying about in terms of security in this sort of new environment.
So having done a few surveys in my time, Tim, was that a question where people can pick more than one, or did they pick what were they most worried about?
It was more concerned, so it was a multi-choice. They could choose all that apply in that case. Yep.
Right. Okay.
And there was, just to fill it in, there was an other category where they could specify. Only 1% of folks picked the other, for what it's worth.
Really? Okay. I mean, certainly, working on it's funny. You and I have been in security forever, right? There was a time where the idea of BYOD, bring your own device, was sacrilegious in our world. But I think we've seen over the last 10 years, I don't know many organizations that are still paying to give you your own phone and stuff like that, right? Even laptops, people have their own laptops a lot of times. But that being said, working from home, especially for organization, you've been worked from home forever. You're used to it. You've got someone though who's used to working on their desktop in the office, and now they go home and they don't have their own laptop. The choices work on their phone or their daughter's laptop, who's also a high school junior and is doing online classes because she's not able to go to work. Yeah. And she has all her apps on there as well. And that's enough to keep a security guy up at night pulling whatever hair he has left out.
It's true, yeah.
And I think that's a big trouble. That's a big problem.
And I think you have to take into consideration how many of the people responding or the employees of the organizations that responded didn't have people working from home before, or didn't have a significant number of people working from home before. And we asked that question. The actual question was a sort of a which of the following statements most closely represents your approach. But 56% responded that to agree, most with, we made a rapid shift to enable a significant number of employees to work from home that had not prior to COVID-19. So that's the majority who are not just enabling people who already worked from home sometime or could work from home, but people who had never really worked from home before or worked remotely before. And that's a big difference than, people working from home more than they were before, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, people who had already worked from home occasionally, you would assume already had the setup for it. And it, Tim, another factor that goes in there, you and I touched on it a little bit off camera before we started, which is not only are they working in on devices that may not be up to snuff or what have you, but in a lot of times they don't have a dedicated office space, right? That may be secure or isolated. They're sharing the house with the kids who are, or spouses or significant others who are also all working from home. And this whole environment, man, what a soup, right, of potential problems. And I think that's something, another thing that'll keep security people up at night about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we also asked, how has working from home impacted the ability of the security staff to do a great job? Like what are the challenges or the problems that information security teams see in this new environment? And it's not surprising that the number one response there was that they can't effectively secure employees' home office environments. So I think we covered that. The one that surprised me a little bit was the response that was number two, and number three, actually. Number two was that it's more challenging to manage what devices are connecting to the corporate network. And number three was it's harder to get visibility of remote assets and systems. And the reason that surprised me is because many of these organizations had those challenges when devices were inside their environment as well. You still have to know what's connected to your environment. You still have to get visibility into those assets remotely. And the infrastructure shifts, but it surprised me that those were numbers 2 and 3 in terms of concerns. The first one didn't surprise me, of course.
No. What else did the survey show us, Tim? Anything else interesting you want to bring up?
Yeah, well, so there were some interesting bits of data in there. One of which was that employees or information security staff believe that employees are more susceptible to attacks when working from home. That was the question. The percentage split here was interesting to me because remember, we had that as the number 2 concern about security was around phishing and social engineering. But when asked if employees are more susceptible, 53% actually said there's no difference in susceptibility to these types of attacks if employees are home. So I always find it interesting when a survey brings out a contradiction like that, where people say, well, I'm really concerned about this. And then you ask them a question of whether that's more likely now. And they say, well, no, it's not really that much more likely, which tells me that that's a worry that persists across the changes that COVID-19 have brought. So that was a pretty interesting data point.
It is. So I've seen this kind of thing in surveys before. I think what it is it shows you that it's a bigger worry on the mind, a state of mind. But when you drill down, what are you doing about it, right? What money are you spending against that? You find out that it's more about a boogeyman in their mind than a concrete type of thing they could put their finger on, right? It's the concept, not the individual. Though, I got to tell you the truth. If I'm a CISO and I'm now faced with my workforce working from home, I don't think it would be a bad idea to invest in some phishing, training and stuff like that for people, or roll that back out.
No, but you have to ask the question of whether or not, I'm not saying that's a bad investment by any means, but whether or not they're really more likely to click that link because they're working from home than they were in the office, or was that really a problem you had all along that maybe you should have invested in?
Well, that goes without saying. I think the other thing, though, and this is kind of the flip side to it, Tim, is whether they're working from home or not, because of COVID-19, we're seeing a lot more phishing attempts, a lot more hacking attempts, a lot more malware kind of stuff. And a lot of it is COVID-19 themed.
Yes.
Right? And so people might be more inclined to click on something around COVID-19 than they would normally.
Anytime there's a world event, we see cyber attackers, take advantage of it for phishing.
Never miss an opportunity for a good, in a good crisis.
Absolutely.
It kind of sucks, but that's the way our world works, unfortunately.
You mentioned spending money, and this was one of the other key points I got out of this survey, which was interesting to me. We also asked about budgets, specifically about security budgets. And the breakdown here, well, the question for what it's worth was, how are security investments at your company changing as a result of COVID-19? And the breakdown here was interesting to me. There was 18% that said they're increasing temporarily, and there was 36% that said they're increasing long-term. So that adds up to 53%. So for folks who are in the security market or who are thinking about how their budget might be affected as a security practitioner, the evidence indicates that a majority of organizations are actually increasing spending either in the short term or even in the long term, sort of post COVID-19.
Interesting. That is, well, it's good to see, if you are a security vendor, it's nice to see budgets right? Growing.
And if you're a security practitioner, it's nice to know that you're not going to have a huge budget cut, or you're at least, majority not likely to have a huge budget cut that impacts your ability to continue securing the environment.
Though, a flip side of that I've seen, and it goes with IT, not just security, is for companies in industry, we're insulated in tech. We haven't seen the kinds of layoffs we have seen in the economy as a whole. But if you are in, a sector where you've seen big furloughs, big layoffs, shutdowns, right? Especially SaaS-based solutions, Tim, right? You are going to see these things. It just follows, right? If I buy 10,000 seats of something and I lay off a third of my force, I'm not, part of my cost reduction is I'm not going to keep 10,000 seats. I only need 6,600 seats. And so especially in a SaaS-based thing, I'm going to dial down how many seats my license is for. And so there's probably some of that.
There will be some. I mean, this doesn't apply to just security.
No, I think it's across the board, as I said.
There'll be some really interesting conversations about the impact on subscription versus perpetual licensing and business for vendors. If you're a subscription business, you might see some of those revenues declining in that sense as people drop usage. It's a usage-based model.
But so much of our, and again, this goes beyond security, it goes to IT in general and beyond. So much of our stuff is SaaS-based apps, and most SaaS-based apps are subscription.
It depends on what you're licensing, of course. I mean, when I think about security products, if you're licensed by number of assets, if the thing you're trying to protect are the number of assets in your environment, and you're making a huge shift to the cloud, or you're unless your business is contracting, which is a very real possibility, you wouldn't see a decline. If you're licensed by number of seats, in other words, if the object that you're tracking is the number of people using it, then those things like furloughs or layoffs would make a big difference in terms of usage there, for sure.
Absolutely. Interesting stuff. Tim, we're getting close to wrap up. What other interesting points do you see in the survey?
Well, maybe the last one I'll point out is that we did ask what immediate steps organizations are taking to respond from a security perspective. And this was interesting to me. The number one there with 53% was that they're expanding the use of current security tools. So that goes right to the conversation we were having, that the majority of folks see an expansion of the tools they already have. The number two, with the same percentage, 53%, is that they're pausing new projects to focus on response. So what we see from that is that people are pushing pause on the things that they were doing that were new projects, expansions, new tool acquisitions, and they're looking at the tools they have in their toolbox today to see what more they might be able to do with those as a response to COVID-19. And that's an interesting trend to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Good stuff. Tim, for people who want to get more information, maybe see the survey report results, where can they get it?
Absolutely. So the full results are posted on tripwire.com. You can find them in our press release. There's a link there from the press releases section. And you'll see them show up in our blog posts on the state of security in a variety of different ways as we break them down and analyze them further.
Fantastic. Hey, Tim, it was great to see you. I'm glad to see you're well. Stay well.
My pleasure.
Regards to all our friends at Tripwire. Keep up the great work, man.
Thanks, Alan. Take care.
All righty. Tim Erlin, VP Product Strategy at Tripwire, here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Hope you enjoyed that interview with my friend Tim Erlin. Now it's the Something Old section of our show, where we try to go over, out of our archives of 2,000 plus videos, we try to pull out something that's both interesting and maybe educational. For today, I went back to a Next Gen CI/CD summit, virtual summit that we did last year with our friends at CloudBees. And this session here is from none other than James Strachan, who is a engineer extraordinaire. He's also an author. And James did a presentation on Jenkins X entitled Serverless Jenkins with Tecton. And it is a bit technical, I'll tell you up front. But if you are interested in CI/CD, working in serverless environments, this is a great how-to with James. So let's now go to back in time to James Strachan for Serverless Jenkins with Tecton.
Hello, and welcome to this presentation on Jenkins X, serverless applications, and continuous integration and delivery. Let's get started. So we know that these days everyone works for a software company. Hello, and welcome to this presentation on Jenkins X, serverless applications, and serverless CI and CD. Now, hopefully, a lot of you will have read the amazing Accelerate book. It's full of amazing and useful information on how we can all become high-performing teams. Increasingly, most of us work for companies that increasingly are defined as software businesses now. So it's really important for all of us to become high-performing teams so we can deliver business value to our customers quickly. We can do work in small increments and get those increments in front of customers as quickly as possible to help us get feedback and verify that we're doing the right stuff. Now, one of the most empowering things about this book is any team can become a high-performing team. It's really about what practices you do as you build software. So working in small increments and so on and so forth. So the whole raft of different things in the book. Not everything in the book can be automated through software, particularly things about leadership and management and so forth. But there's a whole raft of recommendations in the book that are fairly easy to automate through software tools. So things like version control, version all of your artifacts, automate your deployment process, use trunk-based development rather than long-term feature branches, implement continuous integration, implement continuous delivery, use a loosely coupled architecture. Lots of the things in the book, with Jenkins X, we've tried to automate those through software to make it easy for teams to basically do the right thing and go faster. So how does Jenkins X help you go faster? Well, basically, it helps you automate your CI and CD. So rather than focusing on things like infrastructure, cloud, containers, Kubernetes, Helm, figuring out how to do CI/CD, figuring out how to tag Git or do releases. Rather than all of that kind of stuff, you can just focus on building your application and let Jenkins X automate the CI and CD using best practices of CI and CD. One of the features Jenkins X does is whenever you merge to one of your master branches, a new release is created, it generates new artifacts and images of your code. Those are immutable and then usable in any cluster and environment ever. Then it promotes those new versions through all of your environments via GitOps. When you're proposing a code change through your team, and you create a pull request on the Git repository, Jenkins X will automate all of your CI tests to verify your code compiles and builds and all the test paths and so forth. It also creates something called a preview environment that basically creates a dynamic environment for your code change for the pull request. It then builds and deploys the code in that preview environment, so your team can get fast feedback on that new feature. For example, if someone in your team changes the CSS and HTML layout of your website, you might want to actually look at what it looks like with one click of your browser to see what the code looks like before you agree to merge it, rather than just looking at like the Git diff. So preview environments really help you get feedback from your team and again, go faster. So that's how Jenkins X helps you go faster. Let's talk a little bit about serverless. So the CI and CD pipelines in Jenkins X can be completely serverless, as in there is no need to run a Jenkins server forever. Instead, Jenkins X pipelines let you define your pipelines in YAML. We can automate them all as well, so you don't even need to do that step. Then rather than running a Jenkins server all the time, we literally just spin up a pod or container in Kubernetes for the duration of your pipeline. Then we tear it down again afterwards. So in other words, you only pay for the compute of your actual builds. When you're not building anything, there's no need to run any complex large infrastructure. Jenkins X pipelines are based on an open source project called TechStrong that came out of Google and has recently moved to the CD Foundation, and has got contributors from many companies such as CloudBees and Red Hat and IBM and all sorts of other people. So it's really cool technology. It's building the next generation cloud native pipeline engine, which is all completely automated for you in Jenkins X, which is great. So that's serverless CI and CD, and I'll show you a demo in a few moments. What about building serverless applications yourself? So there's another open source project called Knative, which lets you build applications and take functions, turn them into containers, and then expose those containers over HTTP endpoints. And then it automatically scales those containers up and down based on load. So it's rather like if you ever used like Amazon Lambda or Google Cloud Functions or Azure Functions. It's like the typical functions as service experience. The difference is Knative can run on any Kubernetes cluster anywhere, whether it's on-premise, in the hybrid cloud, private cloud, public cloud. So Knative is essentially like a standard way of configuring your application so it will run literally anywhere. Google just announced Google Cloud Run, and Google Cloud Run takes containers and Knative metadata and runs it on either Google's cloud and functions as a service infrastructure or inside GKE. So with applications built with Knative, we can literally run them anywhere. There is no lock-in. It's completely vendor neutral, and we get elastically scaled web applications and functions as a service, which is really cool. So to help people develop Knative and serverless applications in Jenkins X, we've basically baked Knative into Jenkins X. So if you choose to use Jenkins X and Knative together, all of the build packs and the pipelines and everything in Jenkins X just work, and everything just becomes serverless. So I'll show you an example very shortly. Firstly, I've not enabled Knative yet, so I'm going to type jx create add-on glue. And this is going to install an open source library called Glue, which embeds Knative Serve. It's a small microservice that performs the service mesh kind of load balancing stuff for Knative Serve. So it's basically a package of the Glue service mesh plus Knative Serve, which is really simple and easy to install. And so we'll type this install in, give it a couple of moments, and hopefully it should all be installed fairly quickly. So there we go, it's all installed. And if I show you what's happened, if I do kubectl get namespace, we'll see we've got two new namespaces. One's called Glue System and one's called Knative Serve. If I do kubectl get pod in the Glue System, we'll see Glue has installed these 4 pods. And then if I do kubectl get pods in Knative Serving namespace, we'll see Knative Serve has installed these 4 pods. So we have these 8 little controllers that are running. They're all fairly small, little Go applications. It's spun up pretty quickly. But now that means we now have, we've installed the Knative Serve system using Glue, and we're all ready to go building Knative applications in this Kubernetes cluster. So now we've installed Knative. Let's create a new quick start using Knative to show you how to build serverless applications. So to create a new quick start, I'm going to do jx create quick start. There we go. And it's going to use my Git. I'll use my personal Git provider, and this is the organization it's going to store the Git repository in, and I'll go for my personal account on GitHub. Now I'll think of a cool, funky name for my project, and I'll call it Elastic Awesome. There we go. So we're creating a brand new Git repository called Elastic Awesome. I'll do, let's do a Node application. So do a Node.js application. Would I like to initialize Git? Yes, that commit message looks good. So we've created a brand new node application on my file system. We've initialized Git. It's now running the build pack. It's now pushed it into GitHub. And we've now set up the CI and CD pipeline for this node application. So that was pretty quick, right? We typed one command. We've got a brand new microservice using, in this case, Node. We've set up the serverless pipelines with JenkinsX and Tekton using automating our CI and CD. And if we look in this Git repository, there it is, this Git repository. This is the source code for our application. It's a really, really complicated Node.js application, as I'm sure you can see. And we've defaulted in the build pack. So we've created a JenkinsX YAML, which literally just says which build pack to use. We can use this YAML file to add any pre or post steps and override things in the build pack if we wish. We've also added a Docker image, a Docker file, which defines how to package this application as a Docker image. So we've taken the project, we've run the pipeline. Excuse me. We've run the pipeline, and if I run this command, we'll see the pipeline has triggered, and because we've pushed to the master branch, it's triggered a brand new release. So the JenkinsX pipeline has created a Tekton pipeline pod. That pod is chugging away, and it's tagging Git. It's pushed the tag to Git. It's now building all the source code. It's going to create a Docker image and tag the Docker image with the new version number. It's going to generate a Helm chart for this version number, push that into the Helm chart repository. The Docker image is going to be pushed, in this case, to GCR, because we're using Google Container Registry. If you use Amazon, it uses ACR. If you use Amazon, it uses ECR. If you use Azure, it uses ACR. So we're using the container registry. While the build's chugging, I'll just show you what's happening under the covers. If I click the release tab, we'll see it's created a release. It's not quite generated the changelog yet. That should happen any second now. It should have done the changelog if I hit reload. There we go. There's the changelog. So it's tagged Git with 001. It's created a changelog. It's pushed the Docker image to GCR. So we've got a 001 version of my Docker image. It's got the Helm chart with all the YAML inside. Now it's promoting this new version. And if I click on this URL, this is the pull request that it's generated to promote this new version into the staging environment. So if I click on this URL, we'll see this is a pull request that's generated automatically. So this is basically how GitOps works. We're using a Git repository, you'll see, for the staging environment. So staging is an environment and has a Git repository. Production has a Git repository. To promote an application into staging, we automate the generation of a code change, a pull request on that Git repository. So if I look at the diff, this is the actual code change that's being proposed, which basically says add a new application dependency of this Helm chart with this version. So because we've never run this application before, it's changing 3 lines of code. Once we've merged this, the next pull request would just change 1 line of code to change 1 version. Right? So we've generated the pull request. Now this pull request is being verified by the CI and CD pipeline on the pull request. So in a few moments, the pipeline is going to run and verify that it can see this Docker image, the Helm chart looks okay, and everything's kind of passed, all of our governance checks are valid and so forth. We are allowed to deploy this image. So the tests are going to run. It's gone green. The tests have passed. It's now automatically merged because our governance rules said we could merge this automatically if it went green. So the pull request is now merged. Awesome. So now the promotion build on the master pipeline of this Git repository is going to trigger. And in a few moments' time, we'll have our application running in the staging environment. So in one command, we create a brand new quick start. It creates all of the source code for our application. It then automatically set up the CI and the CD for our application. It checked all of that into Git and set up all the webhooks on our Git repository, so it's going to trigger our JenkinsX pipelines using Tekton in a serverless fashion whenever we merge to master or whenever we create a new pull request. Okay, so it's really, really simple. We create a new quick start with one command, and everything just kind of works. So we can see our application is now running in the staging environment, which is great. So let's click on that URL and we'll try out the application. Hooray, isn't that awesome? So we have a Hello World, Hello Node application that's actually running in our staging application. And if I look at the pods that are running in the staging namespace, we'll see kubectl, oh, sorry, get pod. I can't type. kubectl get pod in the staging. We'll see we're running one pod, which has got 2 containers, and one pod is running. So KServe has decided that one pod is enough to surface the load of this infrequent request. Now I'm going to leave that running for a while, and we'll see that in a minute or so, Knative will automatically scale down this pod, because if I don't then invoke this endpoint anymore, KServe will automatically scale down this endpoint. So I'm going to speed up the video in a second, and we'll see Knative automatically scale down this pod. And then once everything's not running, I'll trigger it again, and I'll show you it scale back up again automatically. Okay, we're back. We've left KServe running for a little while, and you can see it's terminated all the pods. You can see we have no pods anymore. Okay, so we were running some pods, we had a little bit of activity, then everything's gone really quiet for about 10 minutes, and so it scaled back initially to 0 ready pods, but kept the pod around. Then after kind of 10, 12 minutes, it's got rid of the pod completely because we weren't using the pod at all. So now I've got no pods at all in the staging repository, which is cool. We've scaled down to 0 automatically, and KServe has done all of that for us. If I then go to this web application, and let me resize this window a bit so it's a bit easy to watch. I'll close those tabs. If I then click reload, you'll see in the background KServe spin back up a pod to service this request. I'm going to hit reload now, click. And we'll see KServe spin up a brand new pod, create a pod, it'll be running very soon, and then it'll service the request. So it's done. So we've gone from completely cold, where there wasn't a pod running at all, there was literally nothing at all running. KServe's automatically spun up a container and serviced a request dynamically. So we've scaled back completely to 0 and then scaled back up again on demand all through KServe. So there we go. We've installed KServe and we've installed Knative and used Knative to auto-scale our application really simply. Now the demo you've just seen has all been around doing a git commit and merging to master to trigger a release. But what do you do if you're a developer and you want to iteratively work on some code before you're ready to commit the code? So I want to show you something in Jenkins X called a dev pod. Now one of the big motivations behind dev pods is, you've maybe heard this phrase before, it works on my machine, right? Throughout the history of IT, we've all had lots of different computers with lots of different software installed on them all. Some people have a Windows machine, some have a Mac, some have a Linux box. So we've had this plethora of different computers with different software, different tools, different stacks, different operating systems and network and storage. And what we really want to do is we all want to deliver business value quickly. So we kind of want to always be running on the most production-like environment we can possibly have all the time. We don't really want to be writing software and then running it on a Windows machine and testing it on Windows and then deploying on production on a Linux machine inside Kubernetes. So the idea behind DevPod is to try and encourage developers to always be in a production-like environment all the time, right? If we can make everything look and feel like it's on your laptop, but actually really be in the cloud in a container in Kubernetes, we get a win-win scenario. Developers don't waste their time finding bugs on a completely different operating system and platform than production. And we get to use the cloud well and reuse the same production-like platform. Plus, it's pretty common at a lot of companies, developer laptops can sometimes be a little on the small size. So let's use the cloud well to help developers go faster, and let's encourage developers to always be using that production-like environment. So let me show you how to create a dev pod. So we're going to do JX, create dev pod, and then we hit return. And then that's going to go off and create a new dev pod, and boom, it's done it. So now this might look like my terminal is now running on my laptop, but now this current terminal has changed from running on my laptop to running in a dev pod in my Kubernetes cluster. So what is a dev pod? So when we're doing automated CI and CD, we've already got a lockdown set of Docker containers, or a set of immutable Docker container images, which have all the software tools we need to do CI and CD. So we've got the version of Maven or Node, we've got the version of kubectl or Helm or Kanika or whatever, all the software tools we need to do CI and CD well in the cloud. We've got Docker images versioned and managed for us to do our CI and CD. What a dev pod is a developer pod where all of those same software tools are installed. So inside this pod, I've got the exact same version of all the tools I need to release my project. Now, I'm using a Node.js application. If I was using a Java application, we'd have the same version of the JVM and the same version of Maven. In this case, we've got the same version of Node and all the default Node packages installed. So inside here, I can just run my Node application. I can run tests. I can debug things. I can compile things. I can try things out. Now, one of the other interesting things about a dev pod is there's two kind of ways of using a dev pod. You can either use a web-based IDE and edit the code inside your dev pod, or you can use a sync program like ksync to synchronize your source code from your desktop into the pod. So you can use a desktop IDE like IntelliJ or Eclipse or something, and then just run and compile things inside the dev pod. So it's up to you which way you want to try. I'm using the web-based IDEs. I'm going to click on this link there, and I'll get a web-based IDE up. So this is going to load Thea from Eclipse, which is a web-based IDE. And there's the source code for this application. Let me make the browser a little bit bigger so it's easy to read. So this is the source code for the application we've just promoted to the staging environment. We'll see here's the really amazing homepage, the Hello Node from JenkinsX. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to also open this other web browser. I'm going to type npm start. So I'm going to run Node inside my dev pod. So that's running inside a pod in a container's running in a pod inside the Kubernetes cluster in my own namespace. I'm then going to open this URL in this browser window here. So this is going to open the dev pod version of my application running. I'll pop it over there. So now we're running our application in a container. It looks like it's running on my desktop, but really it's running inside the container. So now I'll try to go as quick as I can here. I can type awesome and hit reload. Boom, and it's now running. So in other words, we get really fast interactive rebuild and rerunning of applications inside a pod in Kubernetes on the same cluster. So it means we really can, let me try again, we really can be awesome and spell really wrong. Let's fix that, that's bad. Let's capitalize that, that's better. Phew, that's better. So we can be really awesome and go really, really quickly, editing source code, trying it really quickly inside Kubernetes. Then when we're ready and everything's good, we can do a git commit, create a pull request, and submit this code change to the rest of the team. So by using dev pods, we can use the cloud well, we can use the same version of all the software tools we need, so we don't develop with one version of Node and one version of Maven or whatever, and then all of a sudden our pipelines are using a different software stack, and then all kinds of problems happen. So DevPods is a way of really accelerating teams so that we're all sharing the same developer tools, we're all sharing the same software, we're using the same platform all the time. When we're developing in the pre-commit flow, when we do pull requests and generate preview environments, and then when we merge to master and we do releases and promotions, all the way through we're using the same software tools. Now these software tools, they're obviously all stored in Git, in the Git repository, so we can upgrade these software tools whenever we want. But we want to make sure that as a team, we all upgrade together on the same microservice to minimize, undifferentiated heavy lifting. Let's share the tools across every stage of the software development lifecycle. So that's DevPods. So to summarize, JenkinsX automates your CI and CD. We can automate Knative serverless applications or traditional Kubernetes applications as well. Basically, any application that runs on Kubernetes can have automated CI and CD with JenkinsX. If you've got any questions or you've got any feedback, please pop to the JenkinsX community. On the community page, we have a Slack channel where we're all hanging out every day to help you if you have any issues or want to learn more about JenkinsX. If you want to learn more about the serverless Jenkins X pipelines in particular that use Tecton, there's a URL. And to learn more about using Knative with Jenkins X, check out the serverless page. So that's it for me. Thank you for listening. And please check out the Jenkins X community and let's have fun and go serverless. Thank you.
Elsa, you're all over the place.
How am I supposed to do anything when she's over here just doing her own thing?
Okay, well, maybe if Dan played more than just one string, we'd all be more on the same page.
Are you out of your mind? Okay, I do the E string. That's my job.
Isn't there an easier way to do this? There
wish.
has to be.
I literally just suggested something.
Right?
Nobody ever listens to me, though,
It's
so...
ridiculous every time.
When your team's not on the same page, things can get weird, fast. Don't make your DevOps team live like this.
El tutto tu tempo es finito, Dan!
See? It's like we're not speaking the same language. I'm out.
GitLab is the only single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle, making sure your teams are all on the same page.
Do you know how to play the E string?
I can learn.
Hey everyone, back here in the studio. It's time in our show now for our news. And as usual, just a few headlines, a few article pointers from our sites at Security Boulevard, Container Journal, DevOps.com. Not meant to be exhaustive, but at least getting you started in the right direction. Headlines for today, Wednesday the 20th. On Security Boulevard, we have pandemic serves up host of new security worries for 2020 election. You know, we were, I think many of us anyway, were expecting security issues around the election in November to begin with, from nation-state actors, hackers, political parties, and everyone else. And I think we are in for quite a ride now with the pandemic kind of stuff going on with it as well. I hope for and wish for the integrity of our elections, the safety of our voters. This is a good article to read. Go check it out. Also up on the Boulevard, we have how UEM is improving device security for remote workers. And of course, this is something that is really right on the front line right now with everyone. So many of us working remotely. Over on Container Journal, three things you need to know about managed Kubernetes. Yes, and yes. You know, Kubernetes can be hard, and it's not for the faint of heart, but there are some really great managed Kubernetes services. So read the article, 3 good pointers in there. Also on Container Journal, we have port shift launches tools to secure the Kubernetes API. I think we might have mentioned that one before, but you know, Kubernetes APIs and, you know, using APIs to work within Kubernetes is becoming a bigger and bigger part of the whole Kubernetes ecosystem, and the security around those APIs is becoming a focal or flashpoint for a battleground, if you will, in cyber. So take a look at the article. And then on DevOps.com, we've got 3 articles to point out to you. 5 ways to detect application security vulnerabilities sooner to reduce cost and risk. Grafana Labs updates Grafana. If you're using Grafana, that's probably really important to you. And then Fortinet adds support for confidential computing on Azure. And you know, the Microsoft ecosystem is in full force, constantly adding to Azure and improving it and iterating, which is the DevOps way. So anyway, go check those 3 out on DevOps.com. There you have it. The Boulevard, Container Journal, DevOps.com. There's a lot more out there, guys. Don't be shy. But those are a couple of good articles on each to check out. Now, with that out of the way, it's that time in our show where we hand things over to our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon. And Charlene has 2 people today, one from Oracle and one from KPMG. And we'll turn it over to Charlene.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I am here now with Greg Jensen, who is the Senior Principal Director of Cloud Security at Oracle. Hey Greg, how are you?
Welcome, thank you.
And also Joshua McKibben, who is a Cloud Security Leader over at KPMG. Joshua, how are you?
Excellent, thank you.
Good, good. I'm so glad you guys were able to join me today. I'm really excited about the Cloud Threat Security, the Cloud Threat Report 2020 that you guys just jointly came out with May 14th. So let's go over some of the highlights. What are, maybe Greg, you can get us started with a conversation. What is different in this report that is noticeable from last year's report?
Well, from a high level, and how we structure the report and do the report, we've really grown this report over the years from being a single report to now we're looking at this is a part of five-part report series. So every 30 days, we're going to have another report coming out, and this really is to help businesses as they chart their course moving from on-prem to the cloud or into a hybrid cloud environment. And within that, there's a lot of key strategic conversations like shared responsibility, building a strong culture in your environment. And we've really expanded the report as well as a number of people we include in our base survey, which underpins this report, to really enable this broader conversation. But as far as what we really see different this year, I think in light of all the changes that have taken place globally in recent months, we really see some interesting data that we captured in the initial survey, which took place prior to the events. Mm-hmm. And those data points are even more relevant today than they were back when we first gathered this information in late December. And to give you a little context, we see there's this tremendous push by businesses to really look at digital transformation initiatives again. This isn't a new term. But we're now seeing this second wave of how digital transformation is really is an enabling component for businesses. Now look at what we have going on today. Digital transformation really is kind of that fuel that's helping businesses get through these difficult challenges right now. Josh, maybe you've got some to add there.
Yeah, I would think what's different or interesting about it is that it really reflects the change that we're seeing in our clients day to day about their cloud journey. And to Greg's point, right? Even last year, the year before, you had a lot of single environment focus of teams pushing pretty important workloads into generally kind of single platform kind of environments. But now we're seeing kind of most organizations coming in and saying, what's that next wave of platform that we want to adopt? And they're having to rethink the scalability of their security. And that's really hitting on a lot of the points that are raised this year in the report around automation, around definition of security standards, around secure CI/CD and secure DevOps. So I think those are some pretty interesting takeaways from my perspective.
It's interesting that you talk about the whole digital transformation argument, if you will, or conversation, because I'm hearing now from a lot of organizations that this pandemic has actually sped up their decision to really go in with both feet in digital transformation efforts. And they're recognizing now that it's not something that will kind of help them as they kind of become more competitive in the marketplace. But now it's kind of a matter of survival for a lot of these guys. So, is that something that was starting to take place before the pandemic hit? Is that where the conversations kind of shifting from it being kind of a nice to have, or we'll get to it, to we need to do it and do it now?
Yeah, what we really see with this current effort that's taking place is it's an issue of scalability and velocity. Mm-hmm. So we have businesses that already were well entrenched with their digital transformation plans, either in place and they have to make some changes, or they planned on really investing in those areas at some point in the future. Well, they've been forced now to accelerate that and accelerate that investment and that those deployments. Then there's the other side, which is the velocity. I mentioned there might be businesses that really didn't have it on the horizon right now. Could be a small mom and pop brick and mortar business with 2 or 3 locations, and suddenly they've realized we have to find a new avenue to reach our customers. And so there's this we have to get there quicker than maybe we'd planned, down the road one day. We have to be there now. So that velocity of trying to get there quicker is really impacting a lot of businesses, because as we speed up our planning and accelerate planning in a lot of areas of IT, quite often security and risk is a top concern that can come into play, because we're trying to short step the processes. We're trying to get there quicker. We have to enable business and revenue coming in. We have to make sure supply chains are in place and effective. But what about security? Because security does take a little longer to implement than your business cloud service. That can be onboarded a little quicker than security mechanisms can.
Yeah, Charlene, I would just add one point. I have a client right now, a tech sector software company. They've seen a 10 times increase of phishing attacks in their environment since COVID. And they've also had their entire security operations is now working from home. And then the other issue that they report on is that their contractors, they can't get them laptops that are secured. So now they're having to look at new policies, like your contractors are bringing your own devices. And that's a risky endeavor for many organizations. So I think a lot of the issues underpinning this report are really coming to a head as a result of this remote working environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. And just hearing, anecdotally from a couple of different folks, just the challenges that they never even really considered before the COVID-19 hit and folks were forced to work from home. Just something as simple as making sure that the VPN can actually, accommodate such a large workforce, and then also making sure that the apps that they are accessing via the cloud or to the cloud or from the cloud, but that data is also also secure and not only to and from the cloud, but also on their individual machines, and making sure that their home networks are locked down as well. Easy for me to say. So so I have a couple actually data points that from the cloud report I kind of want to just throw out at you guys, and maybe you can comment on each of them. The first one is the idea that IT pros are more worried about corporate security than they are their home security. Yeah. So what's up with that?
Yeah, it's really a remarkable statistic when we really break it down and look at that. In fact, that statistic is even worse in other regions of the world. Asia Pacific, I think we saw a 7-fold difference, a 7x factor. Really where this is coming from, and again, we have to look in the context of when was this survey? It was November to late December of 2019. It was pre-COVID. And since then, I think that statistic, you might argue on one hand, well, people might be more concerned about safety today. I think there's an even greater concern if we put our business caps on. The rush to cloud that we're all engaged in right now through this digital transformation, the remote workers, all this big push right now. If you're an IT security practitioner or leader, you've got your concerns at home. You're getting more concerned with each passing day with what's taking place with your entire business, because they're now being secured by a $39 or $50 router. That you mentioned VPN. For a lot of businesses, that might be their only layer of security outside of some identity controls. But even there, we've got the risk of we're all humans, and we can be leveraged in negative ways. And 59% of the respondents told us that they've had spear phishing attacks that have compromised privileged credentials by users. So this isn't just a widespread attack. This is a targeted attack going towards that 1 or 2 people in the business that have the high level of access and credentials to a business application, and attackers are exploiting it. And I don't know, Josh has probably seen a lot of that himself.
Yeah, I think, if you think about the attacker or hacker mindset and what they're really trying to achieve, they're out for financial gain, notoriety, right? They've got their motives, and I think security professionals know that. They know the value of the crown jewels of these organizations, and the confidence factor of the ability to protect these crown jewels in the face of significant business change, I think is creating opportunity for the bad folks out there to try and come in and take advantage of the situation. And you see that through some of the the metrics in the report, right, with the increase of phishing attacks and the successful compromise of privileged cloud credentials. So it doesn't surprise me that IT security professionals right now are thinking more about, you know, their jobs and the companies they're trying to protect than their own security.
Okay. All right. So the next one is data security is keeping IT professionals awake at night. Not really a huge surprise there, but has that increased over the last year?
That's continued to increase. You know, we talked about this at the top of the hour, how 75% of respondents told us that they've got a high degree of trust in the public cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great right there. So there's faith that public cloud is a more secure environment from what they tell us than their own data centers. That's a big positive. But at the same time, 92% are telling us we just aren't confident in our own ability as a user of cloud or as a customer. We're not confident in our own staff and our abilities in being able to address the cloud security needs in our workplace. So high trust in the cloud, but a lower set of confidence in their abilities to control. So this is something that I think really is causing a lot of concern for those IT practitioners and leaders that really are not able to sleep very well at night.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you mentioned this, Greg, but one of the key metrics that stood out for me in this report was the 92% of participants that said they had a higher moderate capability gap around cloud security. And you know, it's pretty human to be fearful and have anxiety about things you know are not being taken care of properly, whether that's in your personal life or in your corporate job. And so I think that's what's happening. It's people in the know, security practitioners, they know that there's a lot of complex environments that are being built and operated. They know that there's generally kind of a lack of security standards, configurations, and automation of the monitoring of those environments. And they know that they need to close that gap quickly. And I think that's cause for anxiety for anybody that is a security practitioner. There are answers to how to do it. Maybe we can get into a couple of those, but I think that's what's happening from my perspective.
All right, great. So one more, and then we can actually get onto that. Legacy's data security approaches leave IT professionals playing whack-a-mole. Oh.
Yeah, it's here's what we really see in businesses today. There's this one side of the house that people feel we can shift our workloads to cloud and leverage the same IT security practices that we did with our own data centers. It's just now in a different location. Well, we took that big server in the corner and we put it up on an infrastructure environment in the cloud. So it's no different, right? Well, it's very different, in fact. The challenges and risks when you make that change without adopting new cloud principles is pretty high. That's not to say cloud's risky. Cloud is an extremely secure environment. Mm-hmm. But when people don't change their mindsets and realize they have to ramp up in their skills and their knowledge and how to leverage, secure, and work within a cloud environment more effectively, this is when we see risks increasing for businesses.
Yeah, and I think about the whack-a-mole. I love that analogy. First of all, it's a fun game, but second of all, it really does, the mole pops its head up and you're thwacking it, right? So that becomes a very reactionary mindset. And I think the results or the root cause of reactionary kind of mindset is a lack of a plan. It's a lack of a strategy. It's a lack of an appreciation of the kind of change, organizational change, process, people, and technology change that's really necessary to securely enable this adoption of cloud and the operation thereof. So if you don't have that, what's the result? The result is all I can do is whack, right? I'm whacking all day long. I'm in a firefighting mindset. So I think clients who are taking a more proactive approach and a governance approach are helping ease some of that whack-a-mole burden.
Charlene, the front cover of the report, we actually have a really interesting visual, which is a pack of ice flowing down a river. Mm-hmm. And really that artwork was picked because it's a metaphor for what we're seeing in businesses today. We're seeing businesses that are trying to transition from one side to the other, from on-prem to the cloud. And what's underpinning it are hundreds of cloud-based applications, security solutions. Each of them are really islands of their own in terms of being able to manage configurations, individual risk postures, and more. And this is the whack-a-mole challenge. When we don't utilize these larger services that are interconnected and integrated, we end up with gaps in exposure between the services we're leveraging.
Yeah, but that makes a lot of sense, and you know, I'm sure that you know, just talking about the different issues that have really emerged in this report, it's, you know, it's certainly a food for thought for a lot of organizations. So, Josh, you mentioned that there might be some things that organizations might be able to do to kind of mitigate some of the issues, especially related to you know, the data security, keeping IT professionals up at night, some of the things that they can keep in mind.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things that clients can do, but maybe the three that I consistently am seeing as gaps in organizations and what we're kind of recommending. We universally see a gap in the definition of what security means for the platforms and applications. So the report underscores that configuration and the security of, you know, insecure configurations leads to security gaps, and that's true. What I don't see happening as much is that the defining of what security looks like for an individual service. So I think recommendation number one is get really clear around defining secure configuration settings and standards and policies for your environment. I would say that the second thing is it's around automation. Right? Part of and the report underlines this as well, but part of the anxiety that people are having and what needs to happen is they're trying to apply manual and processes from yesterday into a much more dynamic environment. And so I think organizations really need to be thinking about how I can automate these controls. So that's universally kind of the problem I see in organizations today in terms of cloud security and strategy. And then if I were to try to keep it simple in terms of a third, I would say people. I would say that the need to train our security practitioners and making sure you're partnering with individuals that really know some of these environments to upskill your skills is really an important part of how to address this. So those are kind of three of the things I would think about. Greg, I'm sure you've got your own set of experiences, but
I would probably add, you know, as part of that training effort, it's very critical to put the spotlight on the internal challenges around shared responsibility model. When we see upwards of 67% of the staff inside today's businesses don't really understand their responsibilities around shared responsibility for cloud, that means we're leading to potential increased risk with applications and configurations. The other areas, like any winning team, whether it's auto racing, whether it's football, baseball, pick your sport, you could stack it with the greatest the greatest talent, budget, etc. But if you don't have a culture of winning, you're not going to win. And businesses today really need to look hard at, are we building a culture of security from the top down? We might be giving all the staff they need and budget. Let's be honest, that doesn't always happen. But they might be giving all the tools necessary. But if they don't have a top-down push from management that every aspect of the business has security first, then we're really not going to catch up here.
Good point. Very, very good point. So if folks want to take a look at the report themselves, is there a place they can go download it?
Yeah, in fact, both Oracle and KPMG have made this really easy to get to track down. You can go to oracle.com/CTR. That stands for Cloud Threat Report. And to get your free download. You can also go to, from a KPMG perspective, you can go to www.cloudthreatreport.com. We both make that report available. In fact, this will be, as I mentioned before, the first of 5 reports coming out. So we want everyone to come back on a regular basis to see each month these new reports coming out.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time and kind of walking me through what the first of 5 has in store. And let's reconvene hopefully in a month or so and talk about
would love that.
number 2.
Sounds great.
Love that.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Okay, guys, stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so please stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
All righty. Hey, Charlene, thanks very much for a great interview with Greg Jensen and Joshua McKibben. Interesting report. Well, guys, now it's time, as I led off with at the top of the show. You know, we had a little mishap yesterday with John Willis's interview with Paula Thrasher in the amalgamation of the show. You know, we stitch it together from all the different interviews and then try to stream it. And sometimes things happen. And unfortunately, it happened to what I was really looking forward to as a highlight of yesterday's show. But the good news is we have it here for you now. So without further ado, let's go to John Willis with Paula Thrasher, and they'll take it away from here.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, this is John Willis. This is another video podcast series. I've got a great guest this morning. Paula, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Paula Thrasher. I am executive for large organizations in the aerospace and defense industry, and I've led a lot of large DevOps transformations. And John and I first met, well over 5-6 years ago now, and so excited to kind of chat DevOps.
Yeah, Damon was like, you have to meet her. She's like amazing, And Damon always talked about someday I'd like Paula to be my CEO. Like she just nails it, right? And then every time I get to DC, we've gotten to have these amazing conversations about just all things DevOps.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of funny. I had the chance to reflect back on something I wrote like 10 years ago, and I sort of forgot about it. I guess by way of background, I was a software engineer for many years, and then around 10 years ago, I pivoted to I ended up leading operations for an organization that was a software company. And that was kind of my DevOps moment. It was 2010, actually, right when that was kind of a thing. And I went back and read my leadership journal from back then. And it's interesting because on one hand, I think I've learned a lot, but also surprisingly little has changed in a way, I guess, my sort of like philosophy. So I guess what I learned is it's all about people. But what was interesting is I think I had a much greater sense of optimism about my ability to lead transformation when I started.
That's scary. That's sad. Yeah.
So, this is just, you just do ABC and then it's all going to work. But no, it is interesting, actually. I think the one theme that I brought through that is it's really a people exercise. And so I think I've really pivoted somewhere in my career from being someone who makes the machines work to how do you make the people work? How do you kind of drive a culture that enables people to be successful at what they do?
It's really funny you were talking about like the 10 years ago. I've been trying to do these little sort of videos internally at Red Hat, and trying to just come up with little clever things, still our team is pretty new at Red Hat, so people are still trying to figure out who we are. And I figured, let me do a Deming one, right? So I went back and I watched the If Japan can't, why can't we? If you just take out the word Japan everywhere and put COVID, it's like everything in that video is so relevant. You just made me think about that 10 years. It's like watching this thing that was done, a documentary on NBC in 1980. And they're talking about, collaboration, how American companies don't collaborate and there's no consensus. I'm like, oh my God, we're still there, right? Today.
Yeah.
Like, it's the problem. You were talking about sort of leadership and how hard it's always interesting how, like you said, you were naive, right? Back like, this is going to be great leadership. And then, but I've watched you, one of those little snapshots I've had is, Gene's Forum, right? Every year he invites about 40 or 50 of us to Portland and we work on these papers, which turns out ebooks. And there's certain people I was like, oh my God, that would be, if I ever really did work for a big company. I actually do now, but I work for Andrew Schaefer, which is different than actually working. But, like Courtney said, well, why don't you come to Nike? I'm like, Courtney, you would hate me working for you. But Courtney Kissa, you, Scott Prue, I always see like in these little groups where I get a glimpse of your leadership styles. And it's absolutely fascinating to me, having worked so long in this industry, to see people that are like, oh man, I could totally imagine working for her, and because like I would respect everything she says. I would respect the way they even in this micro version. So I'm like fascinated about sort of leaders that go into these like incredibly hard places and then somehow get the parts to move in the right direction. And I know you've done that plenty of times. So how do you do that? The simple like checkbox answer.
Right. Well, I mean, I think in fairness, I think it is an art, not a science. And I won't say that, I think some transformations have been very successful. And my measure of successful is if that organization, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years later is still transforming, right? Others, not as much. And I think the distinction so if you think, I'm going to start with like success. What does success look like? Success looks like an organization. I love Steven Spear. We actually brought him out to my last company to kind of help us out a little as well. It's building a learning organization. So most of the time, if you come into an organization that's not performing well, if it were a learning organization, that wouldn't be true, right? There's some aspect of it where they're not getting it, right? They're stuck. So I think from the sort of approach mindset, if the goal is to actually build an organization that learns and to build an organization that kind of knows how to do things, these new novel DevOps ways, kind of the first thing you have to do is convince people that they got to stop doing the status quo, right? The first challenge is you can't learn if you think the status quo is good enough, right? You're not interested. You're not motivated. So you're never going to get out of that mindset if you don't disrupt somebody from that standpoint. And so, I think I look back at, when we first met, I was talking about DHS and I was trying to disrupt an organization that was very comfortable, right? They were not in a crisis, but I needed them to be in a crisis because they needed to make this transformation. I think the nature of today is everybody is in a crisis. So good news, you can skip that step. You don't have to convince anyone that they need to change. But I think you also have to recognize that sometimes when the crisis happens, people don't instantly go to like, oh, and then the answer is, and we're going to do DevOps, right? Just because people are disrupted doesn't mean they're going to agree sort of the myth of innovation. They're not going to agree that your answer is the right answer for their crisis. Or people don't want to make changes in crisis. That actually people kind of revert to comfortable. We all put our stretchy pants on and pull out the tub of ice cream and get comfortable in stress, right? It is not true that most people are like, let's get at it. So I think the very first step is you got to get the sense of urgency. And then the next step is you've got to get clarity on why we are making this change and why this change is the change we need to make. And that's the hardest part, actually. I think that is kind of where, if I look back to some of the transformations, success or failure, if you don't execute that first part well, it's like such a predictor of how the rest of the transformation is going to go.
Well, the sense of urgency, how do you get, so I love this, right? Like, the first thing is you have to sort of destabilize, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes you find yourself in a situation where that's been done for you by the market, right? Okay. You are under pressure, your deliveries aren't hitting, you've got quality issues, you've got some crisis, you get the front page of the paper, you've got some crisis situation where everybody is painfully aware they need to change. Other times people are going, business is good. We're doing fine. I don't see the issue. And there is a crisis looming, but they don't see it yet. They're kind of turtled in their world. And I think one of the things that I use a lot as a technique to kind of get people uncomfortable is I change what we status. Because so often organizations use status, these meatball charts, red, yellow, green. How's it going? And everybody will tell you it's green. They might tell you it's yellow. Yeah. That's just that actually means it's horribly red, but they just wanted to throw yellow. So you didn't probe too much. And they'll tell you a red once they've already fixed the problem. Right? Red's for me to brag about the problem I just solved.
That's awesome. Yeah.
That's my theory on
that's great.
But they report on status. I did XYZ and it's like a shopping list. I bought milk, I got and you're like, that's great, but what did you that's not an outcome. That's what you did. And if you pivot to start asking teams, like, what are your outcomes? Like measuring, potentially customer outcomes and not just tech outcomes, radical thinking. And, when was your last delivery and how was the quality and how long did it take you to get that idea into production? And you start asking people, how's your flow? In my last group, I started asking the project managers to show me their flow charts and talk about that. We spent 10 minutes, every other week talking about how flow was going and what's holding you back. And it was not like, did you finish the status report? Did you do, I don't care. I'm assuming you're doing the work. Right? I heard you do the work. That I figure you got covered. What's the bureaucracy in your way? When you start getting people thinking about something different, then they are forced to grapple with sometimes the thing that was right in front of their face. Because when they're just in the same mode of reporting the same status they've always reported, they're not going to see the crisis. When you start to ask them how long, if the goal is, for instance, if your goal is to get there faster, and that's not always the goal to us, but let's say sometimes it is.
Right.
You want to get to market faster. Start asking, why can't you get there in a week, in a month, and what's your time frame? Why can't you do that? And then you start to find out why it's hard, and you start to focus that sort of middle manager's mindset on, well, wait, why can't I do that? What's the problem? I think that some of it is just focusing people on the problem and not, I love Courtney's, observe reality, right? You're focusing on the reality, not the status report. So that to me is always technique one.
What's interesting there, again, go back to sort of great leaders in IT, right? Which is, you hit three things right there. And one was just a subtle thing that you said, but every once in a while I'll get to talk to a C-level person and I can tell really quick if I didn't know you, the one of the things I would already have picked up on is the comment you made about, I assume you already doing the work. Because there's so many leaders that isn't a given. Like that whole idea, that you understand the trust model. There's some bad eggs and we deal with that, right? But in general, what I think American businesses just still don't get in the aggregate is that little subtle thing that's like in your DNA, which is, we're not even going to talk about like whether you do the work or do you do the stuff on time or you're screwing off or you're not getting it done. Like that's a given. Let's move on to why you're getting blocked. And I think a lot of leaders, especially in IT, probably everywhere else, but my experience IT, don't have that sort of trust relationship. And it's just so key. I mean, right there, you answered to me why you're good at this.
But I do find it kind of fascinating. We do treat software developers like they're just idiots or something, or operations people or whatever. And I'm thinking like, these are very highly paid professionals, generally speaking. I mean, I've managed help desks where you're bringing in people or very early career people where they need a lot more, guidance. But generally speaking, our teams and certainly our leaders are highly paid and presumably competent. They're not competent, and I agree. You got to take care of that. That's a different issue. But why would I start with the problem children? Right. If I got a problem person, move them on and get that person out of your organization. That's toxic. I do think that is a huge piece of giving, sort of the, autonomy mastery. I don't like to be micromanaged. I don't like to micromanage people. If I have a flaw, it's probably that I certainly don't work well with people who need to be micromanaged. So one way to frustrate me quickly is I give you a task and you come back and you're like, well, I didn't have enough directions. And And I'm like, oh. So I certainly believe in, look, commander's intent. And this is what I need you to do, and go figure it out. And I do think that is actually, there's plenty of organizations I think do lead that way. But I think that is especially in a transformation, you've got to give people the actual thing you're trying to tackle and enlist their help to solve it. Because you can't, I'll look to a 500, multiple 100-person organization that you're trying to, lead at that level. You can't tell 500 people, you can't come up with 500 directions. It's not possible. Even if you take your direct reports, you can't come up with that much how to execute. It's beyond your mental capacity. So what you have to rely on is the people that work for you to execute this vision. So you have to be really clear about what we're trying to do, and then, find out why they can't, execute, and help them.
Right. Because that is look for that sort of intent base is such a theme, right? It actually starts with Toyota, right? And then, like David Marquette turned the ship around, right? That's another sort of intent. And,
absolutely. I love that. I love the turn the ship around piece. And really, it's such a, I think people assume military is very command and control and very micromanager. But it's actually, I'm sure there is some, and anyway, it's a large organization. But actually, largely, the leadership in the military is not. It's very much like turn the ship around. They're not there to tell you how to turn the widget. I think it's actually, in a way, it's kind of a very freeing leadership philosophy. I kind of came through it a little painfully when I took over ops, right? I think I sort of was forged in that because as a software lead, when I was a lead developer, all the people that worked for me, I could do their job. I was a senior developer and I could have done everybody's job, right? When I was leading a team of developers. When I went to go lead an operations organization, and this was, cloud was early, but 2009, 2010, cloud wasn't a thing. And they're building out a data center and they're building out a storage array. I've never built a storage array. I don't know how to build a storage array. I know about storage, but I'm not an expert. This is not my expertise. And suddenly I had to lead in a way that I gave people direction, objectives, and I had to trust them. I couldn't micromanage. Right. And I think I did have some micromanage. I think I probably still have some directive micromanagement tendencies, but that was a very important leadership lesson for me, was to learn how to just trust, technical people to do their job, and to figure it out, and then have enough guardrails that you realized when they needed support. Right.
Well, looking for the signs and the other thing you mentioned about this sort of status reports, right? Like I've had this opportunity over the last couple of years before Red Hat just go in and do this work where I just interview lots of people, and I usually start from the bottom, right? Like I talk to people on the bottom, and the frustration that I would get from people about those, you go into the meeting, everything's like terrible, and then some middle manager or hire has got everything green, and so the first time they're like, hey, I really don't think that one's green. And then it's like, the manager pulls them over aside after the meeting. Hey, don't
talk about that, right? Exactly.
Like we've got, and then by the third meeting, they're like, what do you think, Bob? Oh yeah, no, everything's green. You're right. And there's somewhere in that sort of squishy middle or higher up where like it's sort of somewhere, I would say, like, every sort of leader or manager has two hats, right? The one hat they put on when they talk to the people that work for them, and then there's the hat they put on when they talk to people they work for. And therein lies the art of leadership.
Probably true.
And if you're somewhere, I think you've been fortunate enough to be in positions where you're high enough up that you can start with, hey, we're not going to have this nonsense. Everything's green, and if it's yellow, it's like really terrible. And like you said, if it's red, like it's already been fixed.
Yeah, but I will share that I've certainly been at organizations where reporting up, I had to turn back to the green, yellow, red, and I had to fight a culture where everything was always, the watermelon, green on the outside, red on the inside, right? But I think maybe how you manage up doesn't have to. I think this is another thing people do sometimes. They translate poor leadership up and down, right? Their leadership doesn't have a trust culture, and then they create fear down below. Hey, look, your best job as boss is to be the umbrella. Like they may be messed up here,
Right.
but I shouldn't have any. I'm not going to be effective as a leader if anybody on my team has that culture. So I can be the place where that stops, but it is, there's every large organization. There's just a lot of dynamics and politics at the leadership level that are varied. And it's not always like amazing and this paragon. It's just not, that's just, I think that's true of any organization. But I think that is the difference between, approach from leaders is you've got to actually, just because, and a lot of times too, it's, this particular executive might be doesn't like bad news. This one's fine with it. You got to kind of read different people. But just because you've got this culture going on here doesn't mean you need to reflect it down. I think that's an important thing to remember.
That's an art form too, right? Which is, something I think you just pointed out, like that how do you sort of manage up at the levels you've been in, right? Like that must be, this has to be, I do want to go back to your step 3, is like create and destabilize, and then create the why. But as I'm hearing you talk, like you're giving me these little light bulbs, but is there sort of an art? Maybe you just answered it, but this one wants to sort of have like rigid status. This one can take bad news. But is there a general, like when you go into an organization, is it just pure art, or is there sort of in your mind like, okay, I'm in here now, I've got a couple of executives that I'm going to have to deal with? I think people who aren't typically in your position, it'd be interesting for me. How do you what do you do there? Is there some kind of?
Yeah, I had the benefit of working for a wonderful leader many years ago she'd been in the Navy, she'd been in the White House, she had a great sense of politics. And she had me work on a project in the Pentagon. It was a building full of politics, and observe. And we spent a lot of time, we spent every Friday talking through how to read the politics. It was huge lesson for me. And what I learned is you've got to kind of draw that organizational map out, sometimes literally on the whiteboard, erase nicely when you're done, or use initials, but, draw out that leadership organizational structure and who reports to who and who influences who, right? There's certain situations where people's influence isn't the org chart, right? There might be someone who, to my Pentagon story, there was an individual that had been there for many years and wasn't very high on the org chart, but man, could get a meeting with anyone in that building. And I do mean anyone. He could have met with the Secretary of Defense if he felt like it. Yeah. And that's just who he was, clearly influential, even though he wasn't org chart influential. So you've got, people who are friends, people who are, so you've got those relationships you're trying to suss out. And then I think you've got what I always describe as, what do people believe because of what their role is, and what is a deeply held opinion? So my example is, when you put me in charge of X, whatever, I'm going to go work for Red Hat, right? I'm going to believe Red Hat is the best product in the world because that's what I do. I sell that, right? Or, whatever. You put somebody in a role, they're going to believe that because that's how they're measured. But then there's going to be a deeply held thing. And I always say, my deeply held belief is agile and DevOps and lean mindset. Any role you put me in, I don't think you could convince me to advocate the opposite of this deeply held belief. Right? So you've got to kind of suss out, what are people representing just because of their role, and what are they representing because of a personal belief? Because frankly, if it's a personal belief, it's a lot harder to change their mindset than if it's a role. If it's a role, then that's where kind of the art of changing how people are measured comes in. And that's where I think executive sponsorship is really huge, because that you can't, at the pushing up, I can't change how somebody's measured pushing up. If they're measured to do X and I need them to do Y, I'm out of luck, right? But if I've got a leader who can help move that, then I have I have other ways to influence up that you don't otherwise. So, but I think that actually mapping what your stakeholders, what they're measured by, is important. And that matters because I think sometimes we get all geeky. We talk about the DevOps and the cloud and Kubernetes and blah, blah, blah. And there's no executive leadership who's measured for how much Kubernetes they implement, right? Okay. Or maybe somewhere, but I don't know many. But they are measured for how well they can get, features into production. How stable can they, so if that's what they're measured on, That's what you've got to, knowing that's how you got to message. I think, we get super techy and we forget that the business doesn't care about your, blah, blah, blah tech. They just don't.
Damon says, our good friend Damon, a Damonism coming our way. He says that, like, at some level, that at some executive level, it's really about two things. It's about their direct reports, who they are, and what they spend.
I think that's probably a little cynical.
Well,
but
and that's, I'm pulling out one of those pods.
There's definitely some truth to that. I agree with that point to a point about the size of your empire and headcount and the size of your empire and money.
Let me squeeze it a little bit more in sort of Damon's speak, which is sometimes when we come in, like somebody like me, or, we come in and we start talking about, you're not a learning organization. They're like, wow, that's insulting. Or, we're like, like, we need you to sort of change this. And their sort of mindset is like, does not compute. Where do I spend? Who are my direct reports to solve that? I don't know. Is there something there?
There is something to I will certainly say a lot of large organizations, the reflex is, how can I just hire someone to solve that problem away for me? Just make it go away. I just want to hire a consultant, make it go away. Right? It's too hard, can't think about it. Yeah. Or I want to put a direct report in charge of it and then just, make it go away. Right. So I think there's a certain amount of seems hard. I just need someone to kind of do it for me mindset. I think there is something I'll share this. I think sometimes what's hard in an organization, especially around DevOps, where you're dealing with efficiencies, is if you take an organization where, and this is a real thing that happens, large organizations sometimes, headcount is not just headcount, and it's not even just budget. It's actually a proxy for what level of leader you are and what you get paid. So if you don't have at least X number of direct reports, in totality, headcount in your organization, you cannot be a leader at this level. You cannot have this title. You cannot, if you don't have at least this budget, you can't be X. You can't be this role. So the thought of going to, the vice president of infrastructure and saying, if we do a cloud transformation, I can take 100, infrastructure people and turn them into 8. They go, well, wait a minute, I can't be the vice president if I only have 8, or whatever. And I just, those numbers for scale. But that's a legitimate challenge in a large organization, is you're threatening their career, frankly. But that's back to that, like, is it deeply held? Is it positional? Right. And what is that? It may be that they don't deeply held belief that data centers are the end all be all. It's that positionally, if they commit to do something that brings on that kind of efficiency, they're killing their career. Right. Or that's their perception. So I think that is a real challenge in enterprises. And I think there's also sometimes conflicts between, different parts of the organization drive different priorities, right? Wall Street is all about the money, they're doing financial shenanigans. And sometimes other people are more about maybe getting into markets, but that's a loss, so there's short-term thinking, long-term thinking. Right. And sometimes you get different parts of the organization that are, a lot of tension between those two worlds, that drive change.
I thought when you talk about deeply held beliefs and just, again, being able to recognize that there are sort of the org chart beliefs, and then there are the deeply held beliefs. As I was telling you earlier, I'm going back and putting a Deming thing together. So I was just dusting off all my notes, and he has this system of profound knowledge. And one of the pieces of it is the theory of psychology. And he says, you can show all the sort of theory of the systems thinking. You can show all the sort of variation and performance and all these things, but you won't change anything unless you put the theory of psychology lens on it, which is basically understanding the deeply held beliefs.
Yeah.
How to break those down.
I think that the other thing we discount is, I've encountered this a lot in especially the cloud migrations. You come into an organization, they're in a data center environment, or, it's virtualized or whatever, but, fundamentally it's legacy environment. And I'm the Windows administrator, I'm the Linux administrator. And we're going to go to the cloud, and this is going to be as a service, and you're just going to magically hydrate these things, and I don't need you anymore. And that's very personally threatening. And I think you have to help you can't just go in an environment and fire people. That's one way to do it. That's sort of the Jack Welch model, right? I'm not sure if that's successful or not, but it does work. I'm told, right? But if you're going to bring people with you on this journey, in most organizations, you need to do that. You're not going to get to go on a hiring spree and hire new people. You got to take your current people and make them the DevOps people, right? You've got to help coach somebody through their future. Your future you can be a cloud person. Here's what it looks like. Here's how I'm going to help you get there. Because I think if people are bought into my expertise isn't wasted, I can still be an expert in the new world, they're much more likely to want to go with you on this journey. If you come in with, you system administrators are a bunch of idiots, you don't know what you're doing, you should just be doing cloud, you should all be Docker, throw this in Kubernetes, I don't even know why you're hand building these, forget it, right? Everybody's back against the wall right away, right? And I think it's really important that you actually lead that transformation with, part of that setting the vision is helping people personally see how they're going to fit into this new world. Because if they don't have a role in the world, they're not helping you. Right? I mean, that's a huge, I witnessed a small frustration point in a recent role was we were trying to do some things to move some particularly complex workloads to the cloud, around some more high performance things. And the leading position was an executive walking in going, you guys are a bunch of idiots. I don't know why you're doing this and why you're doing it. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh God, these are the world experts in this. These are the very people I need on this journey to go move this really complicated thing into the cloud. And you just told them I'm a bunch of idiots. First off, they're not a bunch of idiots. And secondly, their ability to help you right now is they're going to, it's going to be a year before you get them back at the table. Like they have just pushed the table away. Nothing else that comes out of your mouth is going to make sense. If instead the conversation would be, hey, tell me about this. We're thinking we want to move this to the cloud, but we think it's hard. What do you think will be hard? How would we do this? How would, and you give them an engineering problem. I wonder if we could do this. How would we do this? Can you go look into, then you've appealed to their sense of expertise and you've brought them into an environment where they can actually help you solve a hard engineering problem and learn along the way. And I think that's kind of the mistake that a lot of people make is they just come in, and it's tempting. I will tell you that when you walk into an organization that you've been in a better place, you've been doing all the modern great stuff, and you walk in somewhere and it feels so backwards. The temptation, and I'm sure I've probably done it a few times without realizing it, to walk around and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe you guys are still doing this. It's hard. You're going to have to kind of control that so that you can bring people with you on the journey.
It's so easy to fall in that trap, because you remind me of two stories. One, I remember early on in the DevOps conversation, Damon would be fighting on Twitter with a bunch of people, and some people I really respected over at Cisco, were sort of like attacking DevOps, and these were like really people that I'm like, oh my God, that person is like they're my hero. How could they not get this? And I called one of them. It was actually James Urquhart, right? Incredible respect. I always have and always will. And I'm like, where are we missing here? Like, we agree on everything. And he actually started saying that sort of thing that you DevOps people are making it look like we're all a bunch of idiots. And it sounds like you're an ops hater. And I'm like, whoa. My whole life has been ops, I think I was born as an op, I think they gave me sort of like, go run these jobs, when I was born, and, my whole life has been ops. And I thought, how can anybody perceive me as an ops hater? And then I realized it was my passion that was bleeding into people reading that. And I think I think that's part of it. And then what I found when my first sort of real startup was Chef, right? And, I was the old guy, like at 40, right? To come in and help them prepare for the enterprise. And one of the things I noticed, and I noticed this today, I noticed at Docker, I noticed it almost everywhere, where these younger people come in and they do have a ton of knowledge about really cool stuff, right? Your Kubernetes, your service meshes, all that stuff. But they'll walk in a room, and me and you both worked in enterprises, right? This is the advantage we have. And they'll walk in a room with 20 people from that company who have been there 25, 30 years. Some of those people were instrumental from taking them from 5 billion to 400 billion in revenue, right? And enterprise architects. And they'll literally act like they're a bunch of idiots. 10 minutes. So like 10 minutes walking in the conference room and like, you're all doing it wrong. And I had to grab and I love, the people at Chef and the other company I was at. I'd pull them aside like, you cannot do this. They've been here. First off, you're wrong. You've been here 15 minutes. You have no idea how complex this system is and all the ins and outs. So to come in 15 minutes is just, you realize how ridiculous you sound, but it is easy to fall into that trap, right? And I think sometimes passion is the overlay that gets us. When we do get into that, gets us in trouble.
Yeah, and I like I said, I don't want to. I like to have the humility to say that I'm never perfect on that, and I know that I do. There are plenty of times where I walk in and it's like, what do you mean you don't have automated tests? What's wrong with you? Your reaction is like when you see certain things, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you don't. Sometimes it's like a poker face issue. Like you're so surprised that something isn't there that you expected to be there, that you react with that, and then that kind of becomes toxic. But I think the trick to maybe not being toxic, is I've had to coach a few of those sharp engineers that have that attitude before. Two things I always say is I always try to remind them, like, did that get the outcome you wanted? Like, did you tell them how much smarter you were? Did that work? If it works, keep doing it, but I don't think that worked. And I guess the other is, I think the model of asking questions is always a better way. The goal is to make somebody think, right? If you want them to think different, you've got to do something that's the catalyst to the thinking. And that can be a targeted question, which gets back maybe to my, asking managers different questions than status reports. Right. If you want them to think about something different, ask them a different question.
Yeah. To throw a fancy word at cognitive dissonance. This is one thing I learned about Andrew. I think Andrew Clay-Schaefer, who I work with, I think he's the king. Sometimes you get annoyed at him. I get annoyed at him. But he's all about cognitive dissonance. Like he just doesn't want to have a straight conversation with you. He wants to put you off guard because then he's going to get the best out of you, And, we were talking about kind of step one was sort of create sort of uncertainty or, sort of shake things up, if you will. And then the second was, I think with all my questions, was I'm having a blast right now. I don't know about you, but the second was, how do you sort of get them on board on why yours is the right way? And I think you've sort of hit some of those things, but I think there's some depth in what you have to do.
Yeah, I think there's two things on that, techniques that I've, sort of go back to often. One is to take that pilot team. It almost always exists everywhere. There's like that little rock star team somewhere that you just got to kind of find. So one is to take the little rock star team and kind of use them, put your energy into letting them be the model for the enterprise and how to do this the right way, right? Give them all the things they need to kind of go show the future, right? That can work. I think in some organizations, the thing you have to be careful of, a little rock star team that shows the new way, is that people, back to the cognitive dissonance, they go, well, that's not going to work here. That won't work here because blah, 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 blah. And that sort of applies to like the industry. We know people are doing multiple deploys a day. We know people have highly resilient systems. We know they have this, and yet that won't work here, right? So it works, but sometimes it doesn't work. And the other technique that I really love is the value stream mapping. I really loved the getting everybody into a room and talking about how we go from like idea to ka-ching. What does that really look like? Not like what we think it looks like. And really talking through all the steps and really visualizing that process and finding forms of waste. It's back to lean. I had such a great experience actually going out to one of our factories. I was over in London and I got a tour by basically the head of the quality group out there. And he's taken me through the lean rooms and they're, wall things of their whole process and forms of waste. They have 8 forms of waste, not 7, but same idea, and it was like, all these things. And he was, this is what we're working on. And it was this amazing, it was like a huge portion of the factory floor was dedicated to this lean wall of what they were working on. Every workstation was like, here's my standard work. Here's what I'm improving. And that value of having a very visual of your flow and just aggressively getting everybody focused on how do we get waste. You do it once, and you start to get everybody to focus on the same problem. because otherwise, this is the Agile challenge, right? Agile was, and I lived it, right? I was doing Agile in the early 2000s, and it was the development team optimizing this and then hitting the wall when they got to the operations team, because the operations team was doing idle, right? They were doing different, we're going different directions. And DevOps was doing them both at the same time, trying to work the whole system, not the piece parts. So the first part is getting everybody in the room and seeing the whole system, not the piece parts. And then the second is to kind of keep doing that in whatever way that works, that you keep looking at the big picture and going, the next thing we need to do is this. This is theory of constraints. The next thing we need to do is this. And then everybody knows why we're working on this improvement. Because I think what happens sometimes is sometimes the thing you need to improve isn't in your area, and you can get really frustrated that, like, why is, whatever, maybe we need to do more automation in the network. Why is the network team working on this? I need them to do, hey, I'm going to take work off them for a second because I know this is important to me long term, right? I think that's how you get that shared goal across the team. I can't say enough for the value of just whole team value stream visualization, however you construct that.
And I found I call them sort of empathetic transactions too, right? When you do value stream mapping, because what you see is when you put these people from different sort of parts of the organization or parts of the value stream, right? The stakeholders, if you will, and you put them in a room and then you start walking through the flow, and then there's sort of this like gap between this box and this box, and like, oh, wait a minute, there's like 4 more boxes in between those, and then you'll watch somebody goes, I always wondered why it took you 3 days. And I'm going to be perfectly honest. I thought you were just incompetent.
Right.
I had no idea there were these
the
things.
The amount of times that people realize, like the number of times that I did them, that people go, wait, you're doing that? We don't both need to be doing that. Like the number of times you find people, it's always where the handoffs are, repeating something they don't need to repeat.
I had a risk guy once.
Or there's that technical miss that's always happening. And a lot of times too, I think what happens too, sometimes it's elevating things to the leadership. The tech team has long understood. The tech team has long understood that they got to duct tape this thing and send it down. But the management didn't realize that was happening, because it just worked, right? The duct tape works. And so nobody noticed. And so I think those are things. And I find actually, if you have a large organization, as I've had in multiple occasions where you've got lots of teams, you would think, well, I got a value stream every team. You don't. Because I will tell you, after you get through the fourth one, they're all pretty much the same problem. And then it's just variations on a theme.
Wow.
And, it's like you can sample your organization and hit maybe 2 or 3 value streams. And I guarantee you will, after you've done the second or third one, you will find the 3 or 4 organizational impediments that are like the thing that if you solve that, you would fix everybody. Or you'd fix 80% of everybody.
That's really cool. I always wondered about that part of it, is like, because, I've actually gone to a sort of a more deeper thing that I learned, but like that with probably more 5 minutes left, probably not, where I found that like value stream mapping is great. But one of the things I've found is sort of botch a loop style is go in with finally find a champion that's willing to convince the CIO that they should bring in this guy called botch a loop, which is the first hurdle. And then then the CIOs tell like all his teams or her teams that you need to listen and answer his questions, and like I go to the edge and I just find this fascinating, this outside person who earns their trust but the value stream mapping is incredible. Damon had this great story. I think he probably told you where they did this thing. A leader brought him in. He wasn't involved in any of the sort of process. He comes in on Wednesday and he sees a whole wall of the value stream, and he turns to Damon and he says, "There's a whole lot of stupid up there," And he's like, it's my problem, right? Like I thought it was pretty awesome. But I love the idea that I always wondered with value stream mapping is how do you, me as a consultant, like how do I tell them, are we going to do everybody? Like this is, there's 90,000 people in this company. And like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. And then I just sort of said, well, we'll just pick a few. But I never realized or never thought of it through that I guess that happens naturally, but that's a really good observation is like if you could just sort of randomly select, you'll find probably 80% of the really organizational problems And
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to overdo it. I think one of the techniques I did, actually, one organization was, the 2-day thing was overkill. There was some really obvious low hanging fruit. We did like a 4-hour thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in 4 hours, we found plenty for that team to work on for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes a small batch.
Yeah, like even in the value stream. So I always try to keep these things to about 45 minutes or so. I mean, I think it's just great. Any sort of parting, thoughts about, just in general?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, to kind of wrap the sort of process of, right, you got to kind of make the crisis. Good news, that's already there for you. You got to create the case, sort of the case for change, why this is the right change, and create that guiding vision that's going to drive people. Change how you measure them, ask better questions, and really make sure you got the whole system. I think that's if you help people look at the system of work and not just their piece, bring them up to that context. That's kind of that's the formula. And I think the challenge, I guess, I'd offer to most organizations, whether your span is, maybe one team or a couple teams or, a whole enterprise or portfolio, is, you've got I think most people at this point are dealing with, certainly a financial crisis, if not other, variety of crises. So this is a moment where you can potentially convince people to say, hey, we need to think different, start there. And that's, that's always a great formula for how you, go about the transformation. And it's art. There's no one answer, but I think those are sort of the guiding philosophy of how you can sort of drive the change.
You should write a book, Paula.
Awesome. Yeah, I got all this, my quarantine book. I'll work on it.
There you go. That's right. All right, great. How do people find you or these days, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. How you find me? Well, I guess I'm in Connecticut. I'm stuck.
Yeah.
I have Twitter. I don't use that much. Certainly, I guess you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me here on DevOps.com and, reach out. Certainly, we'll be helping out with DevOps Enterprise London and a few other events. So, the DevOps days and some other all-day DevOps and things like that. So definitely love to connect to people, all these get-togethers virtually that we are.
Yeah, no, actually, the virtual things, it's kind of fun now. The people that usually there are people that there's only a few people in the Atlanta area, my area, Northwest, but that I get to go to lunch with periodically. But now I'm realizing I can have lunch with anybody now,
That's right. There's no constraints. Exactly.
Well, I really enjoyed it, Paul. I knew it was going to be fun, and so good stuff. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks again.
Hey everyone, Alan Schimmel, CEO, founder of MediaOps here. I want to personally invite you to join us on June 4th for 12 hours strong of TechStrong. TechStrong Con is our conference that we're putting together. The tech industry is so built, and it was such an integral piece of our existence and identity of going to so many conferences, communicating, collaborating, networking, seeing your friends in the industries, your peers. And, just because we can't get together in person anymore, we can certainly do it virtually. We've been doing virtual events at MediaOps for 2 years. We think we've got them down. It's, it's a really immersive experience. But what I'm really excited about with TechStrong is, my friend John Willis, my partner in Digital Anarchist, John's put together an amazing lineup of speakers. I think unlike any you've seen at a virtual DevOps, cloud native, DevSecOps, or cybersecurity related conference before. Check it out. Go to techstrongcon.com. Registration, attendance is free, but space is limited. We hope to see you there. It's 12 hours all day, June 4th. techstrongcon.com. Stay well, stay healthy, stay strong. TechStrong. Okay, now it's the Analyst Corner with Mitch. Mitchell Ashley, CEO, founder of Accelerated Strategies Group. Mitchell, take it away.
Welcome to Analyst Corner. Verizon recently issued their 2020 edition of the Data Breach Investigation Report. Now, this is interesting, useful, valuable resource for security professionals because it does look year over year, going back, I think, to 2015. They did a really nice job of highlighting some of the key findings, some things not too surprising, some things pretty interesting. Some of the findings were things like 86% of breaches are financially motivated. Okay. Organized crime being behind 50+% of those makes absolute sense. Of course, we have a huge financial motive behind breaches and getting access to data. Now, interesting, I think also is that approaching half, 43% of breaches involved web applications. Web apps are a reality, a huge part of our world today, and increasingly so with digital transformation strategies, things being online, digital economy, et cetera. Certainly work from home is a good example from that with COVID-19, as well as that's just the world we're creating is the world of software. That means lots of web applications as well as mobile and others. Now, there's some interesting trends in looking at the action varieties and breaches over time. This is year to year. Number one this year and last year is phishing, top of the list. Number two this year and last year are use of stolen credentials, as I just mentioned. So clearly, hackers are going after sort of the low-hanging fruit. I like to say, and again, I'm not equating these two groups together, but in the sales world, I like to say salespeople are like water. They flow to whatever the path of least resistance is to go get the deal, get the sale. It's a great attribute of salespeople. Now, not so great about hackers. They do the same thing. They're looking for what's the easiest path. Guess what it is? It's the human element, getting access to stolen credentials, phishing attacks, etc. So it's a huge factor in the breaches that we're seeing. Now, some other interesting things I found in the report that would be valuable, I think, to take with us is where breaches were due to misconfigurations. Now, that's hugely on the rise, really since I think about 2019, certainly into 2020. Matter of fact, surpassing misdelivery, and looks like it's going to continue to rise. So that causes me to ask, well, in a software as code world, in an automated world, where we're making so much of our infrastructure and the creation of it more automated, should we see that drop? Should we see misconfigurations become less of an issue? Because taking some of the human element out of it and make it repeatable so it's done the same way, it's certainly done through automation. It's a good question to ask, and maybe an important measure for our own shops to see how many issues are we finding due to misconfigurations, and of those, what were automated? Was the issue in the automation, or is it a manual process that's causing that to happen? Now, kind of back to the phishing topic, one of the things I thought was really interesting is the how many phishing test campaigns that were reported. And going back from 2016 to 2019, that's jumped from 20% to probably around 38%. And it's on the rise. It's on that steep curve. So I expect we're going to see more and more, continue to see more and more of that, and maybe it'll continue at the same growth rate for some time period. Again, it goes back to the human element. That's where both attackers take advantage, but it's also where we need the most investment. And that's not to blame the people side of it. Certainly mistakes are made here and there. Rarely is it a malicious intent on one of our employees or something like that, though that does happen on insider threats and things like that. But it's really about investing in our security knowledge of our people and what can we do to help developers in their training and learning how to develop better, more secure software, giving them tools so that does code scans, vulnerability scans, testing tools for security in applications, and automating all of those things from the creation point of software, even the design of software, all the way through delivery into production and ongoing. That's a huge part of maintaining and creating on both ends of the spectrum secure applications. Some really great findings, interesting findings. There's a lot more detail in this report, certainly than what I've covered today. And thanks to the folks at Verizon for their work on this research. Great thing to share, and I appreciate that they're sharing it with all of us. You can find it on the net. Just go to Google and type in Verizon DBIR for Data Breach Investigations Report, and you'll find it pretty quickly, the 2020 edition as well as earlier ones. Thanks for listening. Be sure to visit the Accelerated Strategies website. We've got a lot of great resources of our own. They're available to you, some about security as well as digital transformation, DevOps, and cloud native. All kinds of good things coming up. We have some research going on around software delivery. You can participate on that by going to acceleratedsurvey.com. We have a short survey, about 7 minutes to complete. We're really getting some great responses too, and kind of getting toward the end of collecting some of those. So we'd love to get your responses in there too. And also don't forget, we offer a 30-minute free inquiry with our analysts. You can talk to any of the Accelerated Strategies analysts. They're always anxious to talk with practitioners who are implementing cloud and security digital transformation, as well as product companies who are looking to understand what customers need and how best to serve those markets. So we look forward to talking with you. Well, be safe, be well, and be careful out there.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this segment of TechStrong TV. I'm really happy to have as my guest for this segment gentleman I've had the pleasure now of knowing probably 4, 5, maybe 6 years. And he's been a regular contributor from DevOps.com since pretty early on. He's also, as I've gotten to know Bob, you realize really how complex and kind of mad genius he is beyond what you may know of him. And Bob is also one of the key analysts as part of the launch of the Accelerated Strategies Group, and he's doing some great work there with Mitchell and Sanjeev Sharma, Gary Groover, some of the other folks just doing good stuff. Let me welcome none other than Bob Resselman to TechStrong TV. Hey, Bob, how are you?
Hey, thanks for having me, Alan.
My pleasure, my friend. So, Bob, I think a lot of our DevOps.com audience, of course, knows you as the mad genius behind RollBob, right? And for those of you, for those of our audience who haven't had the chance, go on DevOps.com, go check out some of the RollBobs. Bob, for the last, has it been 4 or 5 years now, Bob? It's been a while. Yep. What is it, 2-3 times a week we do RollBob cartoons, and they're generally 1 or 4 panels. It's one drawing. Sometimes there's 4 panels within one, or it's just one. But they are the quintessential sort of geek software developer, DevOps kind of cartoons, in that they really strike home. I mean, there are tech-related cartoons like Dilbert and stuff like that. But, I mean, your cartoons, Bob, just really, they just strike the right tone for the audience. So congratulations on that. What many people don't know about you, though, Bob, is that beyond the RollBob cartoons, you're a college professor teaching programming and technology to people. You are an accomplished programmer in your own right, having been in this business for probably longer than you care to admit to. Yes, care to admit to. Yes. And then on top of that, over the last 3 years plus, you've taken a really keen interest in how automation is going to affect our workforce, in the both short-term, near-term, long-term future. And you've done an extensive amount of writing on that. As a matter of fact, there's an article out on today's DevOps.com. I think it's called The Two Metropolises or something like that. Right. Yep. Which is a really good article, haves and have-nots and so forth. So, but All of that aside, Bob, that's not why I asked you to come on the show today. I asked you for two other reasons. First of all, I wanted you to tell our audience a little bit about this new book you're publishing over on Accelerated Strategies.
Right. The book is The Impact of Automation. It's a collection or an aggregation of my essays that I actually wrote for DevOps.com over a period of 2 years. I think there's 28 essays in there. And so we put them all together into a single book. And they cover they cover the socioeconomic impacts of automation. And I wrote them. I've evolved over the time. I've done a lot of research. I've been watching things going on, and I have to say, I have concerns. I do have concerns, and it comes out of a place where I'm very aware of what it's sort of like. Not sort of like. I'm very aware of what it's like to not have money. I can say, a bit of revelation. If it wasn't for tech, I don't know where I'd be. I fell into it. I was very fortunate. I fell into it at the right time in the mid 80s. Before that, I really had no real marketable skill other than being a liberal arts student. And I did well. I can't complain. I did well, but I'm very aware of what it's like when you have to live paycheck to paycheck. That was really part of my world. And I still have a sensibility for what that's like. And I think that's what's happened is that we in tech we're compassionate, but our awareness is such that we live in a bubble. And the bubble is not of our making, it's sort of where we ended up. And by the bubble, I mean is that the average salary for a US programmer is between $80,000 and $100,000 a year. If you're a professional programmer, that's pretty much what you're making. Some make less, some make a lot more. I mean, if you've been at Microsoft for 20 years and you're a fellow, you're making a lot of money and elsewhere. And so that we tend to sort of lose track of what it's like when we have to come up with $500 because the car doesn't work. The car and that and I'm sensitive to that. And what I've seen is that people are saying that with the advent of automation, there's always been new jobs. And the introduction of the steam engine didn't eliminate horses. As a matter of fact, all those people that were probably taking care of horses went on to take care of steam engines. All right, and that's fair. But the difference now is that this is the age of the thinking machine, where machines can really start emulating human cognition, and that's a game changer. And that's a game changer because if we take, the pure Adam Smith, approach to economics is your labor is your value. The labor you contribute in society determines your value and your compensation. Okay, that's very good. And now I'm about to say something that's somewhat controversial and readers can write in later. But, it's a startling fact that in 1890 in New York City, there were 200,000 horses. Horses did everything. They pulled the wagons. They were the means of transportation. They didn't do everything. They didn't make pots and pans, but they were the major means of transportation. And as a matter of fact, the sanitation department was critical in the streets of New York because they picked up all the horse dung. It was a real sanitation issue. So remember the guy with the broom in the cartoons? That was a real job.
Peabody. Yeah.
Yeah, and the horses died in the streets, and there were people that literally took the horses and threw them in the river. And horse culture horses were part of the landscape. Well, if you go to New York today in the island of Manhattan, if you find 1,000 horses, that's a find. There's no more horse labor. And so the translation of that is that horse labor, that degree of biological biological labor is no longer needed. Okay, we don't need horses. Cars can do it just as well. Cars have all the ability of a horse, except they can even come on command now. Okay,
right.
So what happens if a majority of human labor, human abilities, can be automated away? If we look in an automotive factory, it's all automated. If we start looking in warehouses, all automated. If we go to Amazon, all automated. A purchase in Amazon is automated, some fulfillment down the end. So what happens to those people? And I think that's an important question to ask. I think that's a real important question to ask and start considering. And I don't want to take 20 minutes going into it, but I talk about it in the book, and I talk about different aspects in the book, and the numbers are there. The numbers are there when you start paying attention to it.
It's crazy. But you know what, Bob? It was interesting. I was reading an article in The Atlantic today, and I don't even want to get into it because it gets political, and this isn't the place for it. But, it talked, it's almost like everything we're doing right now, Bob, we're looking it through the lens of the present crisis with COVID and everything else. And so when we look at the issue of automation and the future of workforces, we're going to have a new norm. We'll get through this, God willing, right? But there's going to be a new normal. And that new normal, I think for certain things, like automation, for instance, and as it relates to the workforce, this lens tends to be a magnifying lens where it accelerates what we saw happening before. So for the last 3-4 years, you're writing about this stuff, but I think we just put an accelerant, we just put gas on the fire here, right? And I think we are in store when we come back, that a lot of the stuff you saw that you thought might be a little bit further out is going to start happening much sooner than we expected.
Right. I write about that in this week's article. One of the things that's noticeable is how many tech workers are not out of jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're working in a restaurant,
there are some. But right, compared to the 22 million who have filed for unemployment over the last 3 or 4 weeks, it's a minuscule amount, right? We're being forced to work from home while watching Netflix, ordering delivery dudes or Uber Eats, and suffering through, maybe watching me do this 2-3 days a week or 2-3 hours a day, Monday to Friday. There are a lot of people who are worrying about where their next meal's coming from.
Right.
To your earlier point.
And it's because our environment is automated. I mean, I'm talking to a lot of people in a lot of companies, and they're saying, yeah, I've been working from home 2 days a week. Now I'm working from home 5 days a week. Right. And because the systems are there, we're independent of time and space. We can get, and you and I, you're in Florida, I'm in Los Angeles. We're just doing fine. We're just doing fine. But the woman that cuts my hair, she's not doing fine. I can't see her. You should notice I'm getting a little bit of the thing, right? But I can't see her. I can't see her.
No, and it's not only that. I got to tell you, my youngest son is a high school senior. So his prom was supposed to be Saturday, right? And that didn't happen. His graduation's not happening. I feel bad for him on a personal level because he's missing out on sort of these life events. But think about that whole economy because my wife and I were talking about this. There's a whole economy that revolves around proms and weddings and bar mitzvahs and so forth. The tuxedo guys, the caterers, the photographers, the musician DJs, the limousine drivers. How many jobs and how many dollars were snatched away because we didn't have a prom season this year? Or, so when you look at entire industries being shut down, us here in the tech industry we really can't say too much, right? We don't, with 2 loaves of bread.
Martin Ford wrote about this 4 years ago in his book, Rise of the Robots. And he talks about how critical consumption is, rank and file consumption. I mean, how many cell phones can Jeff Bezos use? He can't. He can use 1, maybe 2. You need all those cell phones out there.
Well, that depends if they were hacked or not. But
yeah. We'll give him 10. We'll still give him 10, right? So Jeff gets 10, but that's not 1 million or 2 million or the billion cell phones that are out there playing now. When those cell phone goes away, and they won't go away. But you're right. What happens to the dry cleaner? What happens to all these sort of essential services when they can't function? And that's real. And what you're saying is now hopefully we might want to start looking at alternative ways of running an economy on a grand scale. That's the hope.
Yeah. So to me, that starts sounding Star Trek-y, right? Are we talking about basic income, the Andrew Yang kind of thing, $1,000 a month, or are we talking about changing? It's not just the economy, but society, where our economy, our society is based on one's worth to a large degree, unfortunately, or not, is based upon your ability to earn money, right? And maybe, how do you move away from that?
Well, we have. The fact is we have. And I don't mean the ability to earn money, but let's look at the other side of the coin, the need to spend money.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, money is only as good as you can spend on it, right? And so if people start, and I write about this week, but I've also written about it in the book. I talk about, there's a chapter in the book about UBI, Universal Basic Income, $1,000. And the problem with UBI isn't $1,000 a month, is that it's not enough.
Right.
It's just fundamentally not enough. And I do some analysis in there, and you can look at, I talk about countries where it is enough and countries where it's not enough and all that stuff. But right now, I mean, I'm not spending anywhere near the amount of money I used to. I don't spend a lot of money, but haven't gone out to dinner in.
There's nowhere to spend it. Well, so here's what I try to do, and I've impressed this on the kids. You know what? Thank God we are still functioning here at Media Ops, where we've kind of jigged things up a little doing this versus going out to conferences, and I feel blessed and lucky, and so what we try to do, Bob, is I try to order in at least twice a week from local restaurants to support them. Those that are open, like for instance, I rotate one car in our house every week for a full detail, because the detail place is closed. Their car wash is closed, but the detail will come to your house, do it outside, and clean the car. You know what I mean? It keeps the guy working, and so I've tried to do this over and over with small local businesses here. I try to support them any way we can, buying gift cards that I'm not going to use for a couple months from locals as guys. Yeah. These are all things we could do. It's going to be interesting though when stuff goes. I keep saying normal, but it's not. When whatever's going to be is going to be, right? And we're allowed outside and start returning to some sort of patterns again. It'll be interesting to see the long-term effects here, and especially when we talk about automation.
And the truth, for me, it's at least having a discussion that the impact of automation is beyond us being able to provision 1,000 VMs. I get it, that's important. And I get that keeping a CI/CD pipeline working is important. I get all that stuff, just as, keeping hospitals, filled with stuff and, keeping traffic flowing. That's all important stuff. And that's stuff we do and we've done well, and we're to be commended. I mean, we have made the world a better place. But on the other hand, there are going to be side effects. And I think the more telling one that came up to me, I was talking to my daughter yesterday, and they live in the Midwest, and the school year has been canceled completely. There's no more school this year. And, my kids have been fortunate. My grandkids are fortunate. I got grandkids, and that they're going to be homeschooled, and they have parents that can participate. Okay, let's put it that way. They can participate. But there's a whole other section of kids, and these are children. Let's talk about if you're 7, 8, 9 years old. I mean, you're still
formative years.
Yeah, and you have a vestige of innocence. You didn't wake up and say, I'm going to go, make things not well. Those kids have lost, a whole year, almost a half a year of school in a formative year. And how are they going to make that up? Will that have long-term effects, right? And particularly if you think I'm learning to read now, and if you live in a home where there's no books or television is the primary means of information, what effect is that going to have on the long term? Is that going to create or is that going to continue to propagate the separation that many sociologists are commenting on?
I agree. And I'll give you, so those are the kids in those formative years. What about our college seniors? And look, my son, high school senior, he's going to college. So, that won't affect his career path. But college seniors who are graduating right now, our high school seniors who aren't going to go to college and are going to enter a workforce, this whole thing, internships and everything else, it's really sort of a lost year, and I don't know what that long-term repercussions of this is on it. It's a book that's yet to be written, right? And it'll be interesting. I'm sure they'll be doing sociology studies on this for years and years to come on these kids. We had the key latch generation, and now we're going to have a COVID generation of kids who were a little behind. Anyway, Bob, the book is available on the Accelerated Strategies Group website as a PDF download?
Yes, it should be, yes.
And what's the name of it?
Impact of Automation.
The Impact of Automation by Bob Resselman. And for those who are not familiar, Accelerated Strategies Group is ACCELST, like Excel, ACCELST.com. And if you're not familiar with Accelerated Strategies Group, it's something we spun out here of Media Ops. My good friend Mitchell Ashley is the co-founder, CEO of it. Sanjeev Sharma, former CTO DevOps IBM, is a principal analyst. Bob is an analyst there. Gary Groover, Frank Olhurst, Helen Beal. There's just a superhero lineup of analysts over at Accelerated Strategies Group. Do check it out. Check out Bob's book. There's also a number of other books that these folks have all written that you can get to off of that site. Bob, I wanted to pivot a little bit, though, speaking of superheroes.
Superheroes.
Okay, and let's jump into the latest labor of love you've been going on. We have it running on Security Boulevard, and I think it's being ported over to Container Journal now as well. And that is the adventures of microservice, the decoupling. So let's start at the narrow, just this 12-part arc, and then we'll go to the larger part. What's it about?
It's a story about a superhero named Microservice and his sidekick named CICD, and he's battling his current nemesis, who is another nefarious superhero named Monolithra, right? And they're having a battle over a deployment of an application, and it's about to be decoupled. It's called the decoupling. And Monolithra does not want to see this application decoupled. She wants it to be maintained as a monolithic, tight structure for whatever reasons, her nefarious reasons. We're presently in episode 3, which is in the data center. So you can read episode 1. You can read the birth in episode 1, why microservice came to be, and then we can have the kickoff meeting. We're now in the data center. And we did the comic because, first of all, comics are just amazingly fun to produce. There's very little downside to making a fun comic, especially when you start looking at it. It's a very rich visual. We've done our homework.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let me just say that the comics, the graphics of the comics themselves are first rate. It's as good as anything Marvel turns out or any of that, and it's digital, and they really are great.
Yeah, so head out there now, to Security Boulevard and other places, and it's also a good way to start talking about some real issues we have in the digital infrastructure. Technically, in a how can I say this? In a non-threatening manner. And there are some real issues out there. And so we can talk about them and have fun with them and encapsulate the problems into heroes. So we had that, and we have a couple others coming up. We do one story a quarter, 12 episodes to a story. And then we're starting to plan another one. And we'll see where that goes. And, people can go down, take a look at the comic, tell your friends. I hope you do. We're always, if you want to send a story idea, figure out an email address to send the story idea for, maybe for the next one.
We'd love to. Actually, you don't even have to send the story idea. They could use, we have the community Slack here for TechStrong TV. It's techstrongtv.slack.com. If you go to techstrong.tv, you can grab an invite, send an idea in for the next story arc. So a couple things. Bob, we are only in episode 3 of this 12-part arc. We are looking, just for some companies that are in the microservice space who may want to sponsor this and take it on their site as well, because it's dead on point. It's really, in that same mad genius way you do roll, Bob, beyond the pretty pictures of the comic, there's a real message here in the words that'll appeal to the audience, to our cloud native folks, and to our microservices and DevOps and cyber folks. And so, if any of my vendor friends are out there interested in perhaps sponsoring this particular arc, let us know.
You don't have to be in the microservices. You can be in, distributed computing, or you can be in CI/CD, or, you can be in T-shirts. You can be anybody. You want your logo out there, man, rock on,
Absolutely. So, I want to put that out there. But, Bob, as you mentioned, this is a 12-part arc of a story, right? So, and it's once a week, so it takes us through the quarter. And then we're going to have 3 more this year alone, right? Every quarter is basically a new story arc, new characters, everything. Though there may be some repeats. So it's a really interesting thing, and I hope people will get it and enjoy it. I'm going to try to have our video team, our editing team, throw up maybe while you're on this or afterwards, just a graphic so people can see what it looks like.
Yeah, one of the comments that came up when we were doing planning, the renderings from the storyline, is I decided I wanted to have a best friend like CI/CD, the sidekick. I want that to be my best friend.
We always do. I've wanted one since Robin a long time ago, but there you go. Anyway, so Bob, that's up there, and it's really great work. And of course, you still got the Roll Bob stuff going on. Hey, we are way over time.
Sorry,
but don't be sorry. It was my fault. I just was, egging you on here. But thanks for joining us. Great, congratulations on publishing this book.
Yes.
Keep up the great work on the comics and everything else you do, my friend. Most importantly, stay well, stay healthy, stay strong.
Okay, here I am. Thanks for having me. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. All right, Bob Resselman, Accelerated Strategies Group, Roll Bob, author, mad genius, here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next segment.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Okay, thank you very much, Mitchell. Well, we're coming to the end of our show, but we've saved the best for last. It's my partner and CEO of DevOps Institute, Jane Grohl, and Jane is going to tell us about the Humans of DevOps and a upskill event, skill up event they're running tomorrow on Kubernetes, a virtual event. Jane, take it away.
Hey everyone, it's Jane Grohl here on a little bit of a rainy Wednesday in South Florida. I hope this finds you well and safe, and really happy to be again on TechStrong TV. Today I want to talk about service management, the state of service management. There's a lot of movement, a lot of emphasis moving from project management to product management. I think that's pretty important, that we start to look at how we manage a particular product in a much more incremental and iterative way, as promoted by many of the agile frameworks. But at the end of the day, those that use your product are looking for a service, right? You might have a really cool phone, but and it looks great and it has all the neat features and all of that. But at the end of the day, what you're really looking for is a service that delivers some type of value to you, whether it's a really cool camera, whether it's the ability to do a whole bunch of different apps, whatever that is. You only find value when you get a service, right? When you use a service that's meaningful to you. So while there's a lot of emphasis on product management, I want to take a few minutes and talk about service management, right? How do we manage services? Now, some of you know I come from the ITIL ITSM space and has spent a long time teaching and talking about service management, and ITIL as the most prominent of the ITSM frameworks out there. And the recent release of ITIL 4 shifted some things, kept some things, shifted some things to look at a service value system that really actually embeds a good part of the service lifecycle from version 3 into it. But it is still at its heart a governance model, right? It still has adapted some of the practices to meet Agile and DevOps, but still at its heart, it's a command and control framework. And again, you and your organization may have invested quite a bit in bringing ITIL into your organization over the last several years, and that's awesome, right? That's awesome. But in today's environment, today's digital environment, I think that there's a strong need for many of those practices and processes to go faster. Right, and again, exemplified particularly during this pandemic time, where we've been delivering services maybe different than the services you were delivering pre-pandemic, but particularly from a work from home perspective, but also looking at the dynamics of some of the key practices that are really at the heart of service management. Change, incident, and I think most importantly, the management of service levels. So the crossroads here is really at change management. So let me talk a little bit about some of the differences, and then I really want to introduce you, if you're not already familiar, to site reliability engineering as a service management practice, and look at how many of the activities are in spirit the same, but in actuality pretty different from those that perhaps you might be doing today with ITIL. So let's look at service level management first. So in a traditional ITIL environment, the heartbeat of service management is managing against service levels. And so first, identifying what the agreed or acceptable service levels for your business customer or for your consumer base has to be the first part of the exploration, right? Understanding what those service level requirements are, negotiating them based on cost, based on other factors, and then, of course, measuring against those service levels is critical to understanding the health of that service. And that's the same both in ITIL and in site reliability engineering. And in SRE, everything is managed to SLOs, or service level objectives, which is the difference between 100% and the acceptable amount of reliability and availability of that product or service. So again, pretty much closely aligned in the spirit. In ITIL, there's a much stronger emphasis on service level agreements. So getting some type of negotiated contract or agreement that is executable by both sides. I've always advocated from ITIL, it's more important to get the requirements than the signature. But again, there is a strong emphasis on the SLA as much as it is on the service levels themselves. And sometimes the definition of a service level is confusing. So a service level, just to make sure everybody is clear, is not how fast you'll respond to an incident. You know, traditionally, if you've ever read some of these contracts, you can see that, you know, the service level says, well, if there's a major incident, we'll respond in 2 hours. And if it's a minor incident, we'll respond in 24 hours. That's not a service level, right? Service level is your level of availability, your level of reliability, right? Again, a service is not a service if it can't be consumed. So again, definitions very much very similar. In site reliability engineering, an SLO really drives all of the other activities. As long as those service level objectives are met, the team is empowered, the site reliability engineer as a role is empowered to do a lot of things that don't necessarily require the same level of approval, let's say in ITIL or other ITSM frameworks. So for example, as long as the product or the team is meeting its SLOs, its service level objectives, and the team is then given an error budget. And what does that mean? As long as they stay within the error budget, right, the amount of failure or unreliability, then they can actually self-organize, they can self-regulate, they can release. There's a lot of things that can be done, again, very policy driven, but there is a lot of autonomy from the SREs as well as the teams they work with in order to be able to manage against those SLOs and make sure that those SLOs are there. In traditional service management, the service level agreement absolutely is critical, and while assessing change, we certainly want to understand the impact on the service levels or the service level agreement, but the management of the change is usually done in a much more structured way. Maybe there's a change advisory board that you have to submit a request for change to, who the makeup of the change advisory board may not be the people that actually worked on the change, but higher levels or different levels of people that will assess the risk of the change. And there's usually a much more formal process for releasing a change. Some of that, I think, has been adapted a little bit in the newest version of ITIL, where there is an acknowledgement that peer-to-peer or local change advisory boards or local decision authorities, rather, can make the decision. But you can really clearly see some of the differences in how services are managed, right? SRE is a self-regulating system with consequences, right? With policies and consequences if the SLOs are breached, whereas ITIL is much more a governance, command and control approach with a focus on value with the newest service value system, but still is a much more structured, probably a little bit slower type of process. The other primary difference is that site reliability engineering really looks at services purely from an operations perspective, right? Whereas ITIL looks at other aspects of delivering services like strategies, like the ability to build to a transition. So there's other aspects of it, I think, that are different, because ITIL takes a bigger look at the IT supply chain and SRE takes a little look. So just to wrap it up and to give you some things to think about. First of all, if you're not familiar with site reliability engineering, or if you don't think of it as a service management framework, then I encourage you to do a little reading. The site reliability engineering book that was authored by several folks at Google is available for you to read for free online from the Google website. There's also the Site Reliability Engineering Workbook and some ancillary materials that they've produced as well. There's some derivative works. DevOps Institute rather has introduced a Site Reliability Engineering Foundation certification that really looks at the practices and principles of SRE. On the ITIL side, again, the books aren't free and they're being released very, very incrementally, so they're not all available. And they do map to very specific certifications. But again, if you come from an ITIL background, I certainly encourage you to look at the differences between ITIL 4, ITIL 3, and where your organization is today. So you have a little homework from today's TechStrong TV session with Jane. And I hope, that helps to shape what's right for you, what's right for your organization. It's probably not all of one or all of the other. Hopefully you find a little bit of a balance in adapting some of what ITIL 4 has brought forward and some of what SRE has brought forward. We're in a digital age. And I would tell you that if this pandemic has done anything, it's probably pushed us where we would have been 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, right? We would have gotten here anyhow, not from a human medical perspective of cost, right? But from a technology perspective and how technology is used, how we operate perhaps out of the norm, right? Moving away from a fixed location, moving to a much more cloud foundation. But also, I think looking at how we build, release software, right? How we introduce products, how we manage our services. This situation has certainly illustrated the need to do something different because those that went fast could pivot quickly, right? Those that went slow had to pivot quickly, right? And I think if you look at post-pandemic, I think we'll see some really interesting case studies coming out in terms of what it took. So use this as a time to learn, right? As I said, use this as a time to read, use this as a time to explore, right? Use this as a time for understanding service management, because again, I don't care what role you're in, whether you're a developer, you're somebody in operations, you are involved in managing services. And I think that was really clearly called out in the first SRE book. Okay, just want to tell you one more thing. It is Enterprise Kubernetes Week. So tomorrow, May 21st, DevOps Institute is hosting another one of our Skill Up Day conferences, free to participate. This one's all about enterprise Kubernetes. We have some amazing speakers. The platform is very interactive. We have an expo hall, networking lounge. So if you have not yet registered, please, I encourage you to go up to the DevOps Institute website, register. The event is fantastic and it is tomorrow. So I hope, again, as I said at the beginning, I hope you're safe. I hope you're healthy. I hope you're continuously learning. And more importantly, I hope you're tech strong. Take care.
Hey, Jane, thanks very much. If you have a chance tomorrow, folks, do check in on the DevOps Institute virtual event. They do a good job with those. They had one last month on value stream management, and then this month on Kubernetes. Should be good stuff. Anyway, that's going to wrap up our show for Wednesday, May 20th. I'll be back tomorrow for our Thursday, May 21st show. Hope to see you then. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay strong, tech strong. This is Alan Schimmel.